What's that familiar saying? When life gives you lemons, make lemonade, right? As I parked in front of the building containing our one-bedroom apartment, shared with my wife, Kelly, I pondered the state of our marriage. Was it transforming into a basket of spoiled lemons? Or was it just my imagination? Exiting the car, I retrieved the mail from our box. More bills, ads, and mostly addressed to occupant. I felt exhausted, a regular occurrence from working 16 hours a day, 4 days a week, not to mention the 1 day off from the nearby fast food place. The reason for my hectic schedule was simple. We had bills to pay, and we aimed to save for a future house. Additionally, I wanted to plan something special for Kelly on our approaching 5th anniversary. It's not like Kelly doesn't contribute. She manages the home and works at a travel agency, though the pay isn't exceptional. As for me, I dedicate 40 hours a week to a customer service job where I'm constantly on the phone addressing complaints or processing orders for our clients. It can become monotonous, but the pay is decent, and we enjoy a great benefits package. I earn $18 per hour, with monthly commission checks and a bonus every 6 months, based on the company's overall performance. Typically, my commission checks exceed my hourly wage. On top of that, I work part-time at the fast food place, handling orders and transactions. It may sound mundane, and at times it is, but it's a welcome break from my regular routine. I've been juggling both jobs for almost 2 years, and it's starting to wear on me. On the positive side, I've stabilized our finances and saved a substantial amount for a house down payment, bringing in over $7,000 a month before taxes. My plan is to eventually quit the second job once our financial situation allows. After our upcoming anniversary cruise, I intend to reassess our finances. Due to my schedule, Kelly has been handling the bills for the past year, and so far, she seems to have things under control. Through her job, Kelly secured tickets for a 5-day Caribbean cruise for us at a significant discount. Consequently, I indulged and upgraded to a suite with a balcony and a pleasant ocean view. I eagerly anticipated spending quality time alone with her on the open water. Both of us arranged to take vacation simultaneously, set to depart after work tomorrow, which happened to be Friday. I trudged up the stairs to our apartment and opened the door. The place was dark, and I couldn't hear anything except the clock on the wall. Strange, I thought. Kelly didn't mention not being home. Placing the mail on the table, I flipped the light switch. The place was clean and tidy as usual, but something felt amiss. "Kelly, I'm home," I called out, receiving no response. Entering the kitchen, I noticed nothing prepared. Typically, she leaves a covered plate in the refrigerator on days I return home late, but there was nothing. In the bedroom, the bed was made up, but Kelly was nowhere to be found. I pulled out my phone and attempted to call, but it went straight to voicemail. "Kelly, this is Sam," I said. "By the way, Sam Carmichael. Where are you? I'm at the apartment. Please call me." I hung up and sent a text, receiving no response. In the closet, I noticed several items missing from her side. Where could she have gone? I wondered. Did she leave me? Opening her dresser drawers, I noticed some of her things were gone. In the bathroom, most of her toiletries were missing. Then, I saw it. An envelope on the bathroom counter, addressed to me in her handwriting. Shaky, I grabbed the envelope and opened it. Moving to the living room, I sat down and read her letter. The letter began without the usual, "Dear Sam," just Sam. This didn't bode well. As I continued reading, it conveyed that she was aware this might be difficult for me to comprehend, and anticipated my anger. She expressed a desire to explain that she had been involved in an affair for the past several months, and was currently with the other person on the cruise we had planned for our anniversary. She mentioned our discussions about having children, but confessed that she didn't want to have children with me. She acknowledged my qualities as a hard worker and provider, stating that I would make a wonderful father to whatever children she had. She revealed that she had stopped taking contraception at her lover's request for the last 3 weeks to ensure he would be the one to get her pregnant. She apologized for the coldness of her words and assured me that her lover, Jake, was a good man in more ways than one. According to her, everyone at work was aware of their relationship and supported their decision to go away together. The letter continued, stating that her colleagues believed I would be an excellent father to the children Jake and she planned to have. She admitted to having fallen in love with Jake, but clarified that it was not the same love she felt for me as a husband. She likened her current feelings to the love between close friends or siblings. Despite this shift in emotions, she expressed that she did not desire a divorce and believed it would be best for us to remain married. This way, our combined insurances could cover her pregnancies, and I could raise Jake's children. The letter outlined changes for the future, including spending nights at Jake's place and him spending nights at our place. It suggested I find alternative accommodations on those nights, possibly by considering a third job to keep busy while they were together. She mentioned that love-making relations between us would no longer occur, as Jake insisted on exclusivity, and I no longer excited her. Acknowledging the potential for anger and contemplation of divorce, the letter warned of the legal consequences, assuring me that pursuing divorce would result in securing retirement benefits, half of my paycheck, and child support. Despite recognizing the pain, the letter conveyed that a part of her was hurting too. She and Jake decided to take the cruise using the tickets I had purchased, blocking my number to prevent calls or texts. They planned to share pictures and videos to show what I was missing and ensure her safety. The letter concluded by stating that I had to go as the taxi was waiting, and she was meeting Jake at the airport. They opted to leave a day early for a less tiring start to their cruise. She promised to contact me upon their return, and I could pick her up again. The letter expressed regret, but stated that this was the way things had to be from now on. It was signed, "Your friend, Kelly." I sat in shock as the letter slipped from my hand. Friend? What was that about? With a friend like Kelly who needed enemies? I pondered. Yes, things had seemed off these past months, but I thought it was due to my schedule. That's why I invested in that cruise. The more I mulled over that letter, the angrier I became. I yanked the ring off my finger and hurled it across the room. To hell with her and her ridiculous notions. If she believed I would sit here and accept this, she was out of her mind. I glanced at the clock, 3 a.m. With only 5 hours until my day job, I knew I'd get just a few hours of sleep. Contemplating sleeping in the bed, thoughts of her with this Jake guy flooded my mind. Opting for the couch, I grabbed a pillow and an Afghan and lay down, too exhausted to stay awake. I drifted off, only to wake the next day wondering why I was on the couch. Reality hit when I remembered the previous night. Checking my phone, I hoped for a message deeming it a joke, but sadly, that wasn't the case. Dragging myself to the bathroom, I showered, dressed, and hastily grabbed a cup of coffee for the road. Attempting to set aside personal problems at work proved challenging, especially listening to others complain about perceived issues. Though I did my best, colleagues noticed my distracted state. After lunch, my supervisor, Wanda, called me into her office, a signal that there was an issue. She expressed genuine concern, motioning for me to close the door. Wanda inquired about my well-being, asking if everything was okay at home, and suggesting that I consider quitting the fast food job since I was already working 2 jobs. After a moment of consideration, I decided to open up about my situation. I confessed to Wanda that everything was not okay at home. Trusting her previous openness, I felt she deserved to know the details. She asked me to share, and in response, I retrieved the letter Kelly left and handed it over. Wanda read the letter, and when she finished, she returned it, shaking her head. She empathetically stated that we needed me to have my head completely in the game at work. She mentioned hearing from some colleagues who informed her about my short-tempered and snippy behavior that morning. After reading the letter, she expressed understanding of the challenges I was facing. Realizing I had vacation scheduled for the next week, she suggested I take the rest of the day off with comp time. Additionally, she offered to refer me to someone and wrote down the name and number of the attorney she used in her divorce. Handing me the information, she mentioned that she had been in a similar situation and encouraged me to give the attorney a call, informing her that Wanda recommended her. Grateful for the advice, I expressed my thanks, and she encouraged me to take the next week to sort things out and return with a clear mind. She added a light-hearted comment, saying, "And remember, there's lots of fish out there," to which I acknowledged, "I hear you, Wanda." I thanked her again, and then I shut down my desk, informing my cube mate that I would be back in a week or so. He waved as I left. Upon reaching my car, I retrieved the note Wanda provided and dialed the number. The receptionist at the law offices of Hawkins and Bledsoe answered, inquiring about the purpose of my call. I requested to speak with Linda Hawkins, mentioning that Wanda Green had recommended her to me. The receptionist placed me on hold and returned after a couple of minutes, informing me that Miss Hawkins was scheduled to be in court that afternoon, but had an open slot at 4 p.m. She asked if that would work for me, and I confirmed that it would be perfect. I inquired about the office location, and after jotting down the address, I thanked the receptionist and ended the call. Checking the time, I realized I had enough time to visit the travel agency where Kelly worked. I hoped to intervene and, if possible, seek a refund for our plans. Upon reaching the agency, parking the car, and entering, the 4 other women in the main office glanced up, their expressions hinting at their awareness of the situation. I approached the front desk where Julie, the receptionist, sat. She greeted me, and I stated my intention to see Kelly. Glancing around, Julie informed me that Kelly wasn't present that day. She handed me a large envelope, explaining that Kelly had informed them that I knew and asked her to give me the envelope if I came in. The other women wore smirks, leaving me uncertain about how much they knew. Upon opening the envelope, I was hit by the mixture of Kelly's scent, urine, and an unfamiliar odor. Inside, I found a pair of her soaking wet underwear folded up. Repulsed, I used a pencil to inspect further and discovered her rings covered in a white, gooey substance, unmistakably Jake's seed fluid. At the bottom of the envelope, there was also a USB drive. Disgusted, I confronted Julie, who smirked. As I looked around, I noticed the other women doing the same. I asked if they found it funny, and Julie, embarrassed, looked away. She explained that the thumb drive contained pictures and videos from a bon voyage party they had organized for Kelly and Jake the previous afternoon, with Kelly suggesting that I would enjoy them. An older woman emerged from the back and leaned against the front office wall, observing me. She informed me that Kelly and Jake had already left and that everyone at the agency was aware of their relationship. When I asked if they approved of it, she shrugged and asked what I wanted. I stated my desire for a refund, explaining that I had paid for the cruise and wanted my money back since I didn't have the tickets. She replied that the tickets were non-refundable and mentioned that it was nice of me to let Kelly put one in Jake's name. I disputed that claim, asserting that what Kelly did was fraudulent and insisted on getting my money back. However, she refused, saying it wouldn't happen. In frustration, I declared that I would take legal action, suing the agency and everyone involved. As I turned to leave, Julie stopped me, apologizing for the situation and explaining that Kelly had led them to believe I approved of her actions. She urged me to let Kelly have the cruise, emphasizing that there would be other opportunities. Curious about Julie's relationship status, I asked if she was married, and she responded negatively. I then expressed the pain of being betrayed by someone claiming to love me, and warned her of the potential future pain she might experience. I emphasized my disdain for Kelly and left with a harsh message for Julie to relay. I told Julie to inform Kelly that I hated her and never wanted to see her again. I added a shocking statement, expressing the hope that she rots and dies of AIDS. Julie and the others appeared shocked, and I concluded by announcing my intention to see them all in court before leaving before anyone could respond. With a couple of hours before my appointment at Linda's office, I parked in a shady spot at a park and took a nap in my car after setting my phone's clock. Reflecting on the lack of justice in the world, I asked myself, is there no justice in the world? The nap provided some relief, but my neck felt stiff and sore when I sat up in the driver's seat. After sipping lukewarm coffee, I started the car. Upon reaching the building housing Linda's office, I checked my appearance in the mirror. I looked worn out. Attempting to tidy my hair, I grabbed Kelly's letter and the envelope from Julie before heading inside. In the office, a pleasant blonde receptionist took my name and directed me to a seat. She offered a cup of fresh coffee, which I gratefully accepted. A few minutes later, she led me to Linda's office and closed the door behind me. Linda Hawkins, older than me but still quite attractive, stood up and extended her hand, which I accepted. She greeted me, expressing pleasure in meeting me, and suggested I have a seat. I thanked her and took a seat, responding that she could call me Sam. She acknowledged with a slight smile and encouraged me to address her as Linda, asking about the purpose of my visit. I informed her that I wanted to explore the possibility of getting a divorce. Linda questioned my reason, and I explained that my wife was cheating on me. To emphasize the gravity of the situation, I handed her the letter Kelly had left for me. Linda read the letter, frowning as she did so, and then handed it back to me. Inquiring about the envelope, I passed it to her, cautioning her about its contents. She opened it, reacting with a contorted face due to the unpleasant odor. After closing it back up, she handed it to me and expressed understanding, stating that she didn't blame me for wanting a divorce. She asked about my goals in the divorce, to which I asserted that I wanted essentially everything. I revealed a desire for her to face consequences for her actions, noting not only the infidelity, but also the agency's involvement in defrauding me of more than $2,000. She acknowledged my lack of knowledge about divorce laws and mentioned that the family court system in the state prioritizes economics over justice. Linda, expressing gratitude for the recommendation, explained that having no children was advantageous in divorce proceedings, as divorce is often hardest on children. When I mentioned that we were renting a one-bedroom apartment and working extra to save for a down payment on a house, Linda noted that it was one less thing to deal with. She inquired about my wife's employment at AA Travel Agency, asking about her income. I disclosed that she earned about the same as my base pay, approximately $800 an hour. Linda explained that the court might order me to provide support for a couple of years unless she remarried, and we would likely have to split all assets, including any retirement plans. Regarding her infidelity, Linda clarified that it couldn't be mentioned in the papers due to the state being a no-fault state. However, it might be used in negotiations. When asked about counseling, I expressed that I had not considered it, as there was no way to move past the situation. Linda mentioned that the court might still order counseling, and I inquired about the threat of my wife bringing her lover into the apartment. Linda inquired about my wife's ability to bring people into the apartment, asking if her name was on the lease, and I confirmed that it was. She explained that unless there were threats of damage, there was nothing I could do to prevent her from inviting people into the apartment, as she lived there as well. I expressed frustration at the situation, and Linda acknowledged that divorce is challenging, describing it as something one gets. I chuckled at her comment. Linda suggested that my wife might have a change of heart upon her return and reconsider the marriage. She proposed the idea of a legal separation to allow for a cooling down period, and if I still wanted a divorce after that, we could proceed. Linda also advised me to consider quitting the second job, as earning more money could lead to increased financial demands. She noted that I seemed to have been overextending myself for a while. Expressing my frustration, I asked about getting a refund for the cruise. Linda assured me that we could explore options to address that issue. We discussed the particulars, and Linda made notes as we talked. When we finished, she handed me a checklist of things to do, most of it dealing with the bank. I shook her hand and left, stopping at the front desk to leave a retainer on my way out. I still felt like crap about the whole situation, but at least I was doing something about it. I considered quitting the second job. It was wearing me out anyway, so I decided to go in and talk to the manager tomorrow and give my notice. On the way home, I stopped at the bank and made the changes Linda suggested. I paid off the joint credit card Kelly had and canceled it. Then I emptied out half of all our joint accounts and put it into the separate account I had already set up for the bonuses and commissions. Kelly didn't have access to that account anyway, so I figured it would be safe. I had planned to use that money for a house, but those plans were out the window. I got home, grabbed the mail out of the mailbox, then ate some leftover meatloaf Kelly had made a few days earlier. She had a habit of cooking large dishes, then freezing what we didn't eat for later. It took a while to thaw, but that was okay by me. I sat down with my dinner and looked through the mail, mostly junk, crap, and advertised fluids addressed to occupant or resident, except for one piece that looked like a handwritten invitation with detailed calligraphy addressed to me personally from something called Ramnusha Gallery. I never heard of it, and nearly tossed it as well, but I felt compelled to open it. What I found was an invitation to a private art showing. I wasn't sure if this was something Kelly signed me up for or not. She had always tried to get me interested in the arts, but I frankly just didn't have much time with my work schedule. The invitation said I should be there at 9:30 a.m., sharp. As I looked at the invitation, I felt as though this was something I needed to do. Don't ask me to explain it. I put the invitation on the refrigerator door with a magnet and decided to go. If nothing else, it might take my mind off my problems for a bit. I wore a pair of latex gloves and opened the envelope provided by Julie earlier. Overcoming the unpleasant smell emanating from its contents, I retrieved the underwear, noticing the ring resting in the wettest section. Placing them in a plastic sandwich bag, I sealed it tightly. I wiped down the USB drive with drinks, uncertain if it would make a difference, but opting for caution given the enclosed items. Setting up my laptop, I inserted the drive, anticipating I might not appreciate its contents, and my intuition proved correct. The folder contained pictures featuring Kelly alongside a man, presumably Jake, enjoying drinks and socializing with office friends. Jake's hands were prominently on her in the photos, and the other girls wore smiles. More images depicted Jake's closeness, while other girls, even their supervisor, watched. The penultimate picture showed Kelly over a toilet bowl, undressed, with two girls holding her underwear, one of them being Julie. In the underwear midst were her rings, the ones I had placed on her finger almost 5 years ago. Examining the photos, I could discern a stream of urine soaking the undergarment and the gold rings. The final picture portrayed Kelly still undressed over the toilet, underwear and rings underneath her, smiling into the camera as she waved. The others joined in, smiling and waving with her. I had never felt so humiliated in my life. Soon after, a surge of something else overwhelmed me: hatred. At that moment, I despised her with every fiber of my being. Exiting that folder, I explored another containing several video files. Reluctantly previewing them, I was more focused on hearing what she and the others had to say rather than witnessing her with this individual. I reached the last video, curious about the reason behind her actions of urinating on her rings. Starting the video, I observed her adjusting herself over the bowl as others brought in the underwear. Kelly removed her rings as Julie and another girl extended her underwear beneath. They handed her rings to the older woman, who carefully placed them on the garment to prevent them from falling into the toilet. Jake inquired if she was ready, and Kelly, expressing a need to use the bathroom, looked directly into the camera, stating her intentions and expressing her feelings towards our marriage. She instructed one of the girls to bring in the envelope, emphasizing the inclusion of photos and videos. Kelly directed Julie to ensure that I receive the envelope if I come by the next day. Julie agreed to do so, and Kelly bid me farewell, waving along with the others. After the waves, Jake turned to the camera, assuring that he would take care of Kelly in my absence, and making a derogatory comment about me paying for everything. The video concluded, leaving me with a nauseating feeling. Wasn't typically a violent man, but at that moment, I wanted to eliminate the lot of them with my bare hands and feed the pieces to the dogs. I put my head in my hands for a bit. I was too shaken and angry to cry. All I wanted to do was lash out and hurt someone. Something, anything would do. I couldn't for the life of me understand why she would do this to me. I had never cheated on her, never hurt her in any way. All I ever did was work so that we could have a good life together. All she had to do was tell me I was working too many hours and I would have cut back, but she didn't. I had a thought and pulled up the agency's website. I found it was part of a much larger organization based out of New York and had offices across the country. So I looked and found an email address for the CEO and the chairman of the board. I wrote an email threatening a lawsuit and attached copies of the video, then sent it off. I looked around and saw the pictures of Kelly and me on the end tables and on the wall. I lost it and tore them all down, ripping her image out of every one of them. I was looking for something else to destroy when I heard the doorbell ring. Who is that? I wondered. I looked through the peephole and saw Julie with another woman from Kelly's office. I couldn't remember her name at the moment I opened the door. I growled at them and they jumped back, shocked at my anger. Julie begged to talk, and I questioned their motives, expressing my reluctance to hear anything they had to say. Julie asked if they could come inside, and I pulled out my phone to start a voice recording. Opening the door, I let them in and sat down on the couch, demanding to know the reason for their visit. When asked if they could have something to drink, I declined, urging them to say what they came to say and leave. Julie exchanged nervous glances with the others before conveying that she had talked to Kelly earlier, who was very upset. I responded indifferently and sarcastically, suggested that they could make it up to me by drastic actions. They stared at me in shock, and Julie protested that I couldn't mean such things, reminding me that Kelly was my wife. In response, I handed her the letter Kelly left for me. Julie read it, and after returning it to me, she apologized. I accused them of being complicit in Kelly's actions and criticized their behavior in the video. Julie apologized again, stating that Kelly misled them into thinking I was okay with it. Expressing my dissatisfaction, I told them it was time to leave. After a while, they turned for the door, but Julie turned back before leaving, suggesting that she could help me get over this. I dismissed the idea, emphasizing that I couldn't trust her, and urged them to leave and never return. They left, and I locked the door behind them. Later, I decided to drown my sorrows. I drove to the convenience store on the corner, purchased a 6-pack of beer and a couple of packs of cigarettes. I had quit drinking and smoking when we got married, but I decided to hell with it. Upon my return, I sat on the balcony, drank my beer, and ended up smoking several cigarettes before deciding to turn in for the night. The next day, I got up, showered, washed the beer and cigarette taste out of my mouth, dressed, and headed out. Looking online, I got directions to the gallery and realized I had just about enough time to get there by 9:30, so I headed out. After making a cup of coffee for the road, I pulled up to the Victorian house at the address on the invitation and was a bit surprised to see no other cars. Surely others would have been invited to this showing, I thought. Exiting the car, I approached the door. Before I could knock, it swung open, revealing a petite blonde woman in her early 20s. She greeted me as Mr. Carmichael, mentioning that I was right on time. Introducing herself as Dr. Adrestia Ramnusha, she extended her hand, and I shook it. She confirmed that I was the only one attending the meeting and guided me into a room with a covered portrait on an easel. Instructing me to take a seat, she uncovered the portrait, cautioning that it might be shocking. As she lifted the cover, I saw a painting of Kelly lying in a strange bed with Jake beside her. Dr. Ramnusha apologized and covered the portrait again. I questioned how she obtained the painting and whether Kelly was behind this, expressing my lack of a museed fluid. She clarified that Kelly had not put her up to it and suggested we go to her office for an explanation. I followed her upstairs into an office filled with old books and scrolls. She pointed to a chair in front of her cluttered desk, instructing me to sit while she made tea. Confused about how tea could make the situation better, I sat down, still in shock. Dr. Ramnusha handed me a cup of tea, ensuring that I drank it. Strangely, I began to feel a bit better after a few sips. She smiled and sat down at her desk, and I demanded an explanation for what was happening. She nodded and explained that she helps people like me get justice. She had been watching my wife for some time and became actively involved after Kelly wrote the letter to me. She asked if I had any idea about what was going on, and I admitted that I didn't. I interrogated how she found out about the letter, questioning if she was trailing or spying on us and if she was a private investigator. She replied that she wasn't precisely a private investigator, but explained that overseeing all marriages was her expertise for many years. She asked me to watch a video on the monitor, which appeared to be taken in my apartment. The video showed Kelly writing the letter at the kitchen table, and below it, words scrolled through, reflecting Kelly's thoughts as she wrote. The words revealed her intention to prevent me from filing for divorce and her plan to counter by citing cruelty or misuse, as advised by Jake. I asked about the words below the video, and Adrestia explained that they were Kelly's thoughts as she wrote the letter. I questioned how it was possible, and she simply stated that it was proprietary. I asserted that Kelly's claim of misuse was a lie, as I had never done anything like that. Adrestia acknowledged that she knew, but unfortunately in this state, the court would be more inclined to believe Kelly than me, and she was aware of that fact. I remarked that my lawyer didn't mention the details Adrestia shared. She acknowledged that lawyers in the system were the real winners in divorces, and emphasized that seeking justice or fair treatment was futile. Adrestia revealed that Kelly had informed Jake about her plan during a video on the monitor, showing them snuggling together in plane seats. Jake asked if she left the letter for me, and she admitted to it. He predicted my reaction and questioned what she would do when I filed for divorce. She responded that her lawyer would claim I smack and misused her, even though she didn't mention it in the letter. The video ended, leaving me stunned. Expressing disbelief, I questioned how she could fabricate such a story without consequences. Adrestia explained that people pull off such things all the time. I then expressed confusion about Kelly's motives, highlighting my faithfulness, consistent provision, and hard work for our future. Adrestia suggested that perhaps I'd been too focused on finances and not spending enough time with her, though she clarified that it didn't justify Kelly's actions. I mentioned that Kelly could have communicated with me, and I would have given up the second job if I knew this would happen. Adrestia responded that it was no assurance this wouldn't have occurred anyway. I inquired about her suggestions for my course of action. She proposed assisting me in seeking some form of justice and asked if I would be open to that. I affirmed my willingness, seeking more details on how it could be done. Adrestia reminded me of my notion from the previous night, wearing a mischievous grin. Perplexed, I asked what she was referring to. She maintained the mischievous smile, rose from behind her desk, and approached me. Taking my hand, she signaled for me to stand and mentioned that their ship had already sailed early that morning. I acknowledged that I knew, having paid for the cruise. Adrestia agreed, suggesting that we should pay them a visit. Astonished, I wondered how we could accomplish that. She smiled as she held my hand. Suddenly, we found ourselves standing on the deck of a massive cruise ship. I glanced around and saw a few people on the deck, but I did spot Kelly and the idiot standing by the railing. She wore a tiny two-piece bikini that left little to the imagination. They were locked in an embrace, and Kelly was caressing the front of his suit. I cleared my throat to get their attention. Kelly expressed surprise and questioned how I got there and who was with me. I responded, stating that I represented justice and was there to ensure she paid for what she had done to her husband. Kelly and Jake chuckled at my statement. In a threatening tone, Jake demanded to know what I intended to do. As they started walking toward us, they slipped on something, lost their balance, and tumbled over the railing. I rushed to the railing, and Adrestia joined me. We peered over the railing, and Adrestia restrained me. Initially, I didn't comprehend why. Just as they descended about 15 feet, the largest shark I could ever imagine emerged from the water, its mouth wide open, revealing rows of large, jagged teeth. The mouth of this creature had to be easily 30 feet wide. I couldn't recall ever feeling so terrified. As I looked, Kelly screamed loudly, her eyes wide with fear. Suddenly, both she and Jake were in the shark's mouth. The monster closed its mouth, sending geysers of blood back up to the deck. Then it silently slipped back under the water. I heard cries from the deck and observed other passengers vomiting on the deck. Some had phones out, likely recording videos. Adrestia pulled me back, and I heard klaxons blaring. Crew members hurried to the railing to assess if there was anything salvageable, but it was too late. Adrestia grabbed my hand, and suddenly we were back in her office. I felt nauseated, but she swiftly held my head in her hands, and the nausea subsided almost immediately. I expressed shock and inquired if the events genuinely happened. Adrestia seated me back in the chair and poured another cup of tea. She confirmed that it did happen, handing me the tea and suggesting that it would help. I took a sip of the tea and immediately felt much improved. I was still grappling with what I had just witnessed, but the sense of shock had dissipated. Simultaneously, I noticed something else. I felt no remorse whatsoever, no sadness, nothing. I felt nothing for what transpired with Kelly and Jake. I looked at Adrestia, seeking answers. Adrestia informed me that the tea provided would help me cope with the situation, and indeed, I felt much better after finishing it. Despite the fact that I was once deeply in love with Kelly, there was an absence of sadness over her demise, leading me to question my emotions. Addressing my concern, Adrestia reassured me not to worry about any lack of emotion, attributing it to a side effect of the tea that numbs negative emotions. Curious about Kelly's whereabouts, I inquired, acknowledging that I understood she was deceased. Adrestia acknowledged my religious upbringing, noting that I likely wondered about the afterlife. She invited me to follow her back to the showroom where she had unveiled the portrait. There, she uncovered the painting, revealing a drastic change. The portrait now depicted her face frozen in fear, her eyes wide, her mouth open in an eternal scream. Behind her face was the shark's maw, row after row of sharp teeth, awaiting her. Adrestia gestured towards the painting, stating that it represented where Kelly was now, forever captured in her final moments. She explained that Kelly would spend eternity in that portrayal, regretting her decision to wrong me, a sort of self-made hell. As she hung the portrait on a vacant spot of the wall among rows of similar paintings, Adrestia revealed that all the individuals depicted were cheaters, each one regretting their decisions for eternity. I expressed my realization, and she confirmed, emphasizing that this was her concept of justice. She had been carrying out this work for a significant period, and the walls were not even halfway filled. Curious about the duration of her endeavor, I inquired, and Adrestia responded that she had been engaged in this work for a longer time than I could imagine, expressing a sense of sadness. She took my head in her hands and looked at me intently. For a moment, I thought I saw a tear in her eye. Adrestia mentioned that the upcoming days would be challenging, but assured me that she would always be with me, residing in my heart regardless of age. She encouraged me to go on and live a long life, suggesting the possibility of finding a new love, as she believed someone was waiting for me. After a kiss on the cheek, I felt content, and even now, I can't fully explain the feeling. She accompanied me to the door and closed it behind me. After I left, shaken, I drove to my second job and turned in my notice. The manager wasn't too upset, but he understood and wished me well. We left on a good note, and he said he would have my final check mailed to me. I drove back home, grabbed a beer, and sat in front of the television. For a while, I thought it strange that I still didn't feel any remorse over Kelly's demise. I turned on the television and found that the video of the shark incident had already made the news. It turned out that several people had taken video of what happened. As I flipped through the channels, I saw that several news programs were already talking about the feasibility that such a large beast could exist. All of the reports said they were still waiting for the identity of the sufferers to be released. Going online, I found that video of the shark had also gone viral on social media. It was everywhere: YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, you name it. I couldn't watch the video, so I turned my computer off. I grabbed a pile of trash bags and went through the apartment, collecting all of Kelly's things. Before long, I had everything packed up and stuffed in her car. I called her mother and told her that she needed to come get it. "Why, Sam?" she asked. I told her about Kelly's cheating, but didn't tell her about Kelly getting eaten by a giant shark. She was understandably upset and said her and Kelly's father would be by to pick it all up later that day. They came by that afternoon and left. After making a tearful plea to patch things up with her, I made it clear that no reconciliation was possible. I still didn't tell them about her getting eaten. I figured they would learn about that soon enough. After they left, I dressed and went to a bar and grill where I consumed a juicy burger and several beers. I got through the rest of the weekend somehow and woke up late Monday since I was technically on vacation. I sat in front of the television with a bowl of cereal as a news report came on saying the offices of AA Travel Agency had been destroyed by fire. According to the report, everyone got out okay, but just barely an hour or so later, I got a call from Julie, who was more than a bit shaken up. She informed me about the office burning down, recounting the strange incident where Kelly's desk spontaneously caught fire. They narrowly escaped the flames. She mentioned receiving a peculiar text from Kelly just before the fire, containing references to sharks and the hounds of hell. Julie expressed confusion about the message, to which I replied that I had no idea. The conversation ended, and I sat back smiling to myself. I took a drive to see Adrestia and ask her about the fire, but the Victorian mansion that housed her gallery was gone. I sat there and looked at the empty lot, wondering what happened. After a while, I shook my head and drove home. Update. After a couple of weeks, I received word from the cruise line about Kelly's demise. They conveyed the news of her passaway and included a check covering the cost of my tickets, along with the payout from the accidental passaway and dismemberment policy linked to the tickets. I reached out to Linda, informing her that our separation was no longer necessary. While she offered condolences, they held no significance for me. A few weeks later, the travel agency's headquarters contacted me. They proposed a substantial sum of money in exchange for my silence and a commitment not to pursue legal action. Additionally, they revealed that the entire office where Kelly worked had been terminated, with considerations for a new team in their revamped office. After contemplating their offer, I decided to accept it. Kelly's parents organized a memorial service for their daughter, but I opted not to attend or send flowers. Although they were displeased, they acknowledged my feelings. Life continued, and it took quite some time before I resumed dating. With the elimination of my second job, I began frequenting the gym to regain fitness. The effort paid off, attracting attention from several women at my workplace. While I went on a few dates, I refrained from committing to a relationship. It took a couple of years before I felt ready to trust another woman at that level. Eventually, I found someone, Marcy, a coworker who went through a divorce after discovering her husband in their marital bed. We've been dating for a while now, and I'm seriously contemplating proposing to her. All in all, life is looking up. Dora Adrestia moved on to the next case that came her way. One day, however, she sat down at her desk and took a long look at everything, the pain, the anguish, and the pleas for help. Overwhelmed, she put her head in her hands and did something she hadn't done for 2 millennia. She wept. The signs were prepared and positioned near the front entrance, having spent the majority of the last couple of days perfecting them. Now came the challenging part. Ascending the stairs into the master bedroom, I swiftly stripped the bed, maneuvered the mattress off the queen-sized frame, and half lifted, half slid it downstairs, through the hallway, out the front door, and onto the lawn adjacent to the street. Returning inside, I hurled the slats and bedclothes downstairs, following them outside and adding them to the pile beside the mattress. After another trip upstairs, I dismantled the side rails and swiftly transported them outside. Glancing at my watch, I noted it was 4:22. Time was of the essence. I needed to finish by 5. Reassembling the bed took until 4:35. Next up was the kitchen table, light enough for me to handle alone. I angled it sideways through the door and placed it beside the bed in the yard. The last item was the 6x8 throw rug in the living room. After rolling it up, I joined it with the other items in the yard, erected the signs, and proudly observed the time, 4:55, just 10 minutes until my wife's return. Stepping into the middle of the street, I surveyed my handiwork. It was a sight to behold, almost bringing a tear to my eye. Our marriage bed, the kitchen table, and throw rug, 3 places I knew had been used by my wife and her lover repeatedly over the past 6 months. The signs, perfectly placed and out of reach, completed the scene. I approached each piece of furniture and read aloud the large sign in front of it. "These items are yours for the taking, free. They are no longer wanted in this house. If you are able to stomach the stench of infidelity and broken vows, help yourself." The sign above the bed detailed my wife's infidelity, specifying her regular liaisons with her lover over the past 6 months. Above the kitchen table, another sign recounted their activities, typically just before she served me dinner. On the throw rug, a sign indicated their preference for that spot. Each sign was adorned with a 17 by 24-inch photo of the adulterous couple in the act. Behind the table, a 5th sign revealed the identity of my wife's lover, Greg Allen, her boss at Mitchell Price, and Allen Realty. Married with 3 children, he was unaware of his wife's actions, but not for long. The time was 4:57, just in time. She would be home any minute. As I turned to assess the gathering crowd of neighbors and the increasing number of halted cars, some onlookers phoned friends or the police. I nonchalantly acknowledged the gathering and retreated into the house, closing the door behind me. Precisely at 5 p.m., my wife's car rounded the corner. Observing the commotion near our house, she slowed down, her gaze fixed on the spectacle unfolding on our lawn. I imagined her focusing on the furniture and signs, particularly the large photos of her and Greg Allen engaged in their illicit activities, their expressions captured in moments of lust and pleasure. Even with her car window between us, amidst the crowd of 40 or 50 onlookers, I still heard her desperate cry. "No. Oh God, no." Finally, her gaze shifted from the signs to the front window of our house, where she spotted me standing. We locked eyes. She appeared devastated, her complexion drained. Tears streamed down her cheeks. It seemed as if she was questioning me, mirroring my own bewilderment. I observed her for a moment before turning away, drawing the curtain shut behind me. Perhaps now is the time to recount how my wife, Sherry, and I ended up in this tragic situation. My name is Jack Meyer. I met Sherry during our junior year of college, introduced by a mutual friend. Instantly, I was captivated. Sherry wasn't conventionally beautiful, but she possessed an irresistible charm. Standing at 5'2" with striking blue eyes and shoulder-length blonde hair, she had a petite, yet perfectly proportioned figure that enchanted me. From that moment, I was smitten, never doubting my ability to win her heart. Sherry and I began dating, quickly becoming inseparable. Within a month, we shared our first closeness moment, an experience unlike any other. I was consumed by my love for Sherry, unable to get enough of her. Though we were not maidens, our passion for each other was all-consuming. Every moment together was blissful, every touch electric. Our love deepened over the years. After graduating, we married and settled into our first home, a condo in Van Nuys. Sherry pursued a career in real estate while I found work in electronic manufacturing. We built a life together that I believed to be perfect. For the next 13 years, we shared an idyllic existence. First in our condo and later in our dream home as our finances improved. We welcomed our children, Shelby, now 8, and Ryan, now 6, whom we adored beyond measure. Our family was our world. So, what went wrong? I wish I had the answers. I wish I had noticed the subtle signs indicating something was amiss. But I was oblivious, living in a bubble of love and trust. It took an unexpected event, our daughter Shelby falling ill at school, to uncover the truth. It was a Thursday when I received the call from the school nurse just before noon, informing me of Shelby's illness. In the midst of a staff meeting, I asked the nurse to contact my wife. Despite attempts to reach her at her office and on her cell, she was unreachable. So, the nurse called me. Recognizing the urgency of fetching my daughter, I apologized to my staff and hurried to Shelby's school to retrieve her. Upon reaching home, upon opening the garage, I was startled by an unfamiliar car parked in my spot beside my wife's. Instantly, a lump formed in my throat, and my stomach churned. No, it couldn't be, I reassured myself. My wife, the woman I cherished above all else, couldn't possibly be having an affair. But why was there a strange car in the garage with the door closed? Something was amiss, and I needed answers. I couldn't expose my daughter to this uncertainty. I instructed Shelby to stay in the car for a moment, explaining that the exterminator was spraying for bugs, and the fumes could make her feel worse. It was the first time I had ever lied to her. Shelby complained about being tired and wanting to go inside, but I reassured her that I would check first before coming to get her. Later, Shelby asked me what was going on, and I reassured her that everything was fine, attributing my discomfort to the odor in the house. I left Shelby with her grandmother, promising to return for her in a couple of hours. I didn't disclose what I had witnessed, simply asking my mom to care for Shelby until I returned from work. Though tempted to return home and confront the cheating duo, I realized I needed more than a mere confrontation. I craved revenge. As I drove back to my office, I began devising plans that would bring ruin upon my wife and her boss indefinitely. The electronics firm where I worked had multiple divisions. As a senior engineer in the medical equipment division, we shared a large complex with another division specializing in commercial security equipment. Upon reaching my office, I instructed my secretary to ensure I wasn't disturbed for the rest of the afternoon, then called my counterpart in the security division. Dan Taylor, a stellar engineer and longtime friend, agreed to meet promptly. He mentioned he'd already be coming my way to drop off some blueprints for copying. I informed my secretary that Dan could enter my office as soon as he arrived. True to his word, Dan knocked on my door just 20 minutes later. I requested him to come in and close the door, noting that I needed his help. Dan remarked that I looked like I had seen a ghost, to which I responded by recounting the shocking discovery I had made earlier. I explained to Dan that I had caught my wife and her boss having an affair in our house, specifically in our bedroom. Despite the disbelief, I assured him it was true, detailing how I found them together when I came home to pick up my daughter from school. I refrained from confronting them at the moment, prioritizing my daughter's well-being by having her wait in the car while I quietly left and took her to my mom's house. Dan expressed his sympathy, and asked about my plan moving forward. I admitted uncertainty, but emphasized the need for evidence, mentioning my intention to gather audio and video recordings of their encounters. I sought Dan's assistance in acquiring security cameras and microphones to discreetly place around the house. Dan questioned the certainty of there being a next time, suggesting that the incident might have been isolated. However, I dismissed this possibility, citing conversations between my wife and her boss about regular rendezvous over the past 6 months. I explained my reasoning, noting the lack of alternative locations and the convenience of my empty house during work hours. After a few more minutes of discussion, we delved into the details. Dan mentioned having access to a new beta line of wireless miniature cameras and microphones compatible with my laptop or home computer. Additionally, he had a small voice-activated recorder I could discreetly place under Sherry's car seat to capture any conversations she might have while driving. It would only record her side of the conversation, but it was better than nothing. I expressed gratitude and informed him I'd collect everything from his office the following day. Returning home that evening proved to be the most challenging task I'd ever faced. I wasn't sure if I could face my wife and pretend nothing had happened. I decided the best course of action was to make Sherry believe I wasn't feeling well, which was true. I retrieved Shelby from my mom's, and upon arriving home, Sherry was preparing dinner in the kitchen. Upon seeing Shelby with me, she grew frantic. I questioned Sherry about her whereabouts and why she hadn't informed me about Shelby's illness, mentioning that I received a message from the school nurse on the answering machine. Sherry explained that she must have accidentally turned off her phone while showing houses and had been busy all day. I couldn't help but think cynically that she was likely preoccupied with her affair with her boss instead of attending to our daughter. Despite this, Sherry hugged Shelby and apologized before helping her to bed. I acknowledged that despite her flaws, my wife did love our kids, and it seemed I was the obstacle to her happiness. Sherry then returned to the kitchen to prepare soup for Shelby and finish dinner for the rest of us. Feeling unwell myself, I informed Sherry that I would sleep in the guest room that night, just in case I was contagious. She noted that I felt clammy and looked pale. Silently, I acknowledged the irony of feeling unwell after discovering my wife's affair. Without responding, I headed upstairs, initially dreading entering the master suite, but needing my grooming supplies, toothbrush, and work attire for the next day, so I forced myself into the room. A window was open, and the scent of lovemaking had dissipated. The bed was neatly made. She must have changed the sheets. It pained me to look at it. All I could envision was her boss having lovemaking with her, whispering sweet nothings about belonging to him alone forever. Anger surged within me, but I suppressed it. I needed to remain composed until I could unleash havoc upon them both. And I would. That much was certain. I gathered my necessities and retreated to the guest bedroom, shutting the door behind me. I stripped down to my underwear and slipped into bed. My body felt rigid. I wanted to weep, but I stifled the urge. I had a mission to accomplish, and I couldn't allow emotions to interfere. For hours, I lay in the darkness, sleep evading me. After tending to the kids and putting them to bed, my wife entered the room. I pretended to be asleep. She pressed her palm against my forehead before exiting the room, shutting the door behind her. Sherry typically handled taking the kids to school, so I rose early, showered, and left the house before her awakening. It probably struck her as odd, but I could simply attribute it to needing to compensate for lost time from yesterday when I felt unwell. Frankly, I didn't care much about her opinion at this point. I just wanted to be free. Free from what? Until yesterday, I believed it was a blissful marriage founded on lifelong loyalty, honesty, and commitment. How painfully mistaken I was. Arriving at work before the rest of the staff, I brewed a pot of coffee and began outlining my strategies. I realized I needed to cancel our shared credit cards, transfer half of our joint accounts to a separate bank under my sole name, alter my will, life insurance, and 401k beneficiaries, removing Sherry and naming only Shelby and Ryan. It felt like such a trivial effort to dissolve the last 13 years of my life. It should have been more challenging. Deep down, I suspected it would become harder at some point. I also understood the necessity of securing a competent divorce attorney to protect myself from Sherry's potential exploitation. Being in a no-fault divorce state, Infidelity wouldn't significantly affect the financial settlement, but it might aid in retaining custody of my children. Sherry had demonstrated my insignificance in her life, yet she was a devoted mother, and I didn't want to deprive her of her children. I merely sought joint custody to ensure I remained a vital presence in their lives. I fought to suppress thoughts of our love life and the humiliation of overhearing my wife praise her lover's superiority to me in every aspect. If I allowed myself to dwell on it now, I'd begin to doubt myself, which I couldn't afford at the moment. That reckoning would come later, and when it did, it would likely devastate me. With my to-do list complete, I phoned Dan's office. He assured me everything would be ready by noon and offered to assist me in installing and operating the equipment. As I attempted to focus on clearing paperwork from my desk, I noticed Sherry's call on my cell phone. Despite her typically affectionate tone, her voice only fueled my anger this time. Sherry expressed concern about my well-being, mentioning that she hadn't been able to check on me before I left that morning. I responded vaguely, stating that I needed to clear my head. She suggested an idea to make me feel better that evening, but internally, I couldn't help but feel resentful and deceived by her lies. However, I kept my response neutral, indicating that we would see. Sherry commented on my apparent lack of interest, to which I replied that I was preoccupied, rather than uninterested. We agreed to meet at home by 6, and she reassured me that she would be in the office all day if I needed to reach her. I phoned Dan, who confirmed everything was prepared, instructing me to meet him at the loading dock entrance. We loaded all the equipment into Dan's van, and with both of us working on the installation, we had it all set up and tested by 3:30. Then, we installed the software on my home office PC and configured a secure folder to collect and store everything captured by the cameras and microphones. We strategically placed bugs in the living room, kitchen, guest bedroom, and, notably, the master suite, ensuring the latter had 4 cameras to capture nearly every activity. As an additional measure, we installed a camera and microphone in the master bathroom, just in case the couple decided to shower together after their encounter. The system was motion-activated, with the cameras triggering the microphones. I was prepared. That night was exceptionally challenging for me. After dinner, and once the kids were asleep, I followed my wife to our bedroom. I turned away from her and pretended to fall asleep. Sherry noticed the change in our usual routine and asked if everything was all right. I expressed some insecurities about whether I was enough for her, to which she reassured me that I was more than enough and that she couldn't bear anything happening to me. She emphasized that I was her perfect lover. Despite her reassurances, I remained distant and brushed off her concern, stating that nothing was bothering me. I feigned exhaustion, closed my eyes, and attempted to sleep. Later, I heard Sherry softly crying. I felt no sympathy for her, but I pondered whether her tears stemmed from shame for her actions or from feeling mistreated by me again. I rose before her and seized the chance to place the voice recorder beneath the seat of her car. I also reviewed the video and audio recordings from the installed equipment, confirming that everything from the previous night was captured clearly, even in the dim nighttime conditions of our bedroom. Initially, Sherry was a bit curt, mentioning that I had said some hurtful things the night before. Then, she gave me a quick kiss on the cheek, and her demeanor shifted to cheerful. Perhaps it was due to her afternoon plans with her boss. I poured her a cup of coffee and informed her that I'd be locked in my office all day. She mentioned having to show several homes that afternoon and expressed confidence in making a significant sale, but assured she'd be able to pick up Shelby and Ryan after school. With a peck on her cheek, I headed towards the garage door. Sherry reminded me that I had forgotten to say, "I love you." She emphasized how important it was for her to hear those words from me every morning. I apologized, explaining that there was a lot on my mind, but Sherry insisted that it was important for her to hear those words. I promised not to forget in the future, and with that, I left. Yeah, I'll tell some girl how much I love her if and when I ever find another girl I can trust enough to fall in love with. The intel Sherry provided about showing homes all afternoon led me to think she'd probably be with her true love. I hoped so. I was tired of games and wanted this ordeal done. I spent the morning working in my office but kept glancing at my watch. Finally, at noon, I told my secretary I'd be gone for a few hours and put my plan in motion. I borrowed a company van and parked across from my house, waiting to see what happened. It wasn't until nearly 1 o'clock that I saw Sherry's car arrive, open the garage door, and park in her usual spot. When she entered the house without closing the garage, I figured she was either leaving again or expecting someone. 10 minutes later, I realized she was expecting someone as the same car from the day I caught them pulled into the garage, taking my place, just as he had taken my place in my wife's life. I saw him get out of the car and the garage door closed. I had to give it to them. They had the nerve to meet in my house, in my bed, to carry out their affair. It just proved they thought they wouldn't get caught or didn't care. Well, they'd soon find out they were wrong. They were caught. And I'd make sure they both cared with this final proof of my wife's infidelity. And knowing I'd soon have all the visual proof I needed of their affair, I finally let the tears fall. For 13 years, I was convinced my loving wife would never cheat on me, just as I'd never cheat on her. With the tears came doubts. Was he a better lover? Maybe better looking, but neither of us was exceptional. Why risk our marriages? I desperately wanted to confront them. But why? What would it achieve? I'd catch them, but I'd already done that once. Would I feel better by confronting her lover? Yes, but I'd likely go to jail. By this time, neither of them were worth it. My only worry was how this would affect my kids and his, as I was prepared to confront him, just as he had confronted me. By 2:30, they must have finished, as the garage door opened and he left 15 minutes later. My wife did the same, closing the garage door behind her. I knew she'd return home with the kids by 3:30, so I quickly parked in the garage and made my way to my home office. I didn't want to review all the footage, just ensure the evidence was safely on my hard drive. After 10 minutes, I'd had my fill. It wasn't an exact replay of their previous encounter, but it was explicit. They began by having lovemaking on the kitchen table where I eat. They joked about how many times they wondered if I'd ever realize I was dining where he had been closeness with her so often. Then, they moved to our bedroom, though not before her lover suggested using my daughter's room for a change of scenery. My wife adamantly refused, stating it was off limits to involve their kids' rooms. At least she seemed to have some principles, just not concerning me. In the bedroom, they resumed their activities. I noticed neither of them expressed love, but my wife continued to praise her boss as the best lover she'd ever had. However, I couldn't comprehend why they then moved to the throw rug by the living room fireplace, where they engaged once more when finished. I found it strange that she didn't bother changing the sheets, assuming she would do so when she returned with the kids at 3:30. This gave her plenty of time to air out the room and remove any evidence. Since I rarely arrived home before 6 and had secured the evidence I needed on my hard drive, I shut down the system and left the house without bothering to check the assumed mess on our marriage bed. I'd seen enough, and although my heart was hardened against my wife, I still felt sick inside, a sickness soon replaced by burning anger and hatred. I may have even smiled, knowing the hell I was about to unleash on their cheating heads. Back at work, I briefed Dan on everything. Like me, he couldn't comprehend how a supposedly loving wife like Sherry could do what was now clear. Not only did she break our sacred vows, but she also went out of her way to humiliate me to her lover, always affirming his superiority. All these thoughts plunged my soul into a deep abyss of pain and despair, from which I knew I had to emerge to complete my task of destroying them both. I needed to find a good divorce lawyer, and Dan suggested contacting the law firm the company used for recommendations. I spoke to a corporate lawyer there who gave me 3 names of divorce lawyers known for protecting husbands' rights. The first one was retiring and not taking new clients, but the second one agreed to meet me the next afternoon at 3. With that settled, I resolved to handle canceling credit cards, changing beneficiaries, and transferring funds the next morning. When I returned home that night, Sherry was in the kitchen preparing dinner while the kids did their homework in their rooms. She wore a yellow sundress and looked beautiful. For a moment, I thought my heart would break all over again. She was smiling and seemed so happy. I assumed it was her usual post-afternoon delight mood. She greeted me and asked about my day, mentioning that hers was great due to making a sale. I responded with mild interest, aware of the reason behind her happiness. I asked if anything else notable happened that day, or if she met any interesting people, to which she denied, stating that she was focused on work to return home to her family. Despite her reassurance, I couldn't shake the suspicion of her affair as I headed upstairs to change clothes. While changing, I noticed the sheets had been replaced and the room aired out. Upon returning to the kitchen, I mentioned the water on the shower floor and asked if she had showered that afternoon. She appeared startled and denied it, suggesting a possible clogged drain. I speculated about the possibility of someone sneaking into the house for a rendezvous and showering afterward, which seemed to unsettle her. She attempted to brush it off with humor. As dinner progressed, conversation was minimal. I surprised Sherry by switching seats with her, prompting her to question the change. I explained it as a desire for a change of scenery. She appeared puzzled and ate little, mainly moving food around on her plate. During dinner, the kids talked about their day, but Sherry and I mostly listened, making occasional comments. After we all helped clean the dishes, I returned to my office to work on my project. I reviewed footage from that day and selected suitable stills to turn into photographs, which I downloaded to a photo file for printing. Next, I carefully crafted wording for the signs I would create with the photographs. All that remained was to visit my lawyer to initiate the divorce, get my finances in order, and await the next visit from my wife and her lover. When I finally went to bed that night, Sherry was already asleep, or at least pretending to be. I was fairly certain my actions that evening had given her something to ponder. Not that it mattered. There was nothing she could say or do to change my mind about divorcing her for her infidelity, and there was a small silver lining in the fact that I believe I'd managed to make her at least somewhat uneasy. Today was Tuesday, and she had mentioned making another sale on Thursday, so I took that as a signal that she and her lover would be meeting on that day. That would also mark the day I brought them down. The following morning, I rose early again, showered, and left before Sherry woke up. I had a lot to accomplish and wanted to allocate as much time as possible to get it done. My lawyer appointment wasn't until 3, so I had plenty of time to handle all the financial matters. First, I visited HR, where I changed the beneficiary on my life insurance and 401k from Sherry to Shelby and Ryan. I received some odd looks from the woman assisting me, but I didn't feel obligated to explain my actions to her or anyone else. Next, I canceled all our joint credit cards and obtained new ones in my name alone. Then, I proceeded to the bank, where I transferred half of the funds from our joint checking and savings accounts to another bank in my name. I knew I needed to address our home, but I presumed the courts would allow Sherry to stay there with the kids, so I postponed action on that front until I consulted with my lawyer. At 3, I met with my lawyer, finding him to be agreeable enough. He cautioned me that since we were in a no-fault state, Sherry would likely get custody of Shelby and Ryan, and I'd lose the house and half of everything else to my wife, even with proof of her infidelity. I instructed him on how I wanted the petition written, and when he expressed doubt about my chances of taking nearly everything from her, I reassured him. I was confident I could persuade her to agree to whatever I wanted. He wasn't pleased, but he complied with my demands, assuring me he would have everything prepared for her to be served Friday morning. I also had him draft papers to file against her boss and his company for intentionally wrecking my marriage. Those documents would also be ready by Friday morning. I was prepared. When I returned home that evening, I kept my demeanor cool towards Sherry. Frankly, I had reached my limit and just wanted the whole ordeal to end so I could move on with my life. I knew there was still a lot of pain and heartache ahead, but I acknowledged there was no turning back. Besides, I'd finally be sharing the anguish and misery with my unfaithful wife and her despicable lover. After a subdued dinner with minimal conversation, I retired to my study, printed the photos of the lovers I intended to use, and crafted the signs without interruption. I also found time to compose a letter to Greg Allen's wife, enclosing prints of the large photos I planned to use on the posters, informing her that I had plenty of video evidence to provide her in case she decided to divorce her husband, as I was divorcing mine. Shortly after 11, I went to our bedroom to ensure Sherry was asleep, then made my way to her car, retrieved the voice-activated recorder from beneath her seat, rewound it, and listened to its contents. I overheard one side of a conversation that sounded like it was with Greg. The caller expressed gratitude for their time together that afternoon and mentioned missing Greg after they were together. They discussed the idea of spending a whole week together and fabricated a story about a real estate convention they must attend. The caller mentioned having to give Jack occasional attention to keep him happy, but expressed a desire to be exclusively with Greg. They confirmed plans for Thursday afternoon and ended the call. I was taken aback to discover that her words didn't sting as much as they had in the past. Perhaps there was still hope for me after all. Little did she realize how soon she would belong solely to him forever, and the knowledge that I was just one day away from dismantling their comfortable lives filled me with a sense of satisfaction. Revenge, I was realizing, wielded formidable power. I swapped out the tape with a fresh one and returned the recorder under her seat, hoping it would capture evidence of her anguish the next day when her world crumbled. I hardly slept a wink that night, not because I was heartbroken. I had surpassed that. No, my sleeplessness stemmed from the anticipation of everything I hoped would unfold the following day. For the last time, I rose from bed. While Sherry continued to slumber, I stood gazing at the woman who had once been my love, the mother of my children, the woman I had imagined spending the rest of my days with. Tears welled in my eyes as I realized I had shared my bed with her for the final time. Never again would our bodies entwine in passion. Never again would we cuddle or discuss our future. Our future was non-existent, and as I turned away from her and departed, I pondered whether she comprehended the toll she was about to pay for betraying me. She likely didn't, but she would soon learn. After showering, I left the house, stopped for breakfast at a diner, then briefly swung by work to inform my secretary of my absence for the day. I phoned Dan and briefed him on the impending events. He wished me luck, cautioned me to be cautious, and requested that I keep him updated on the proceedings. I made a brief visit to my lawyer's office to ensure all was in order for serving my wife and Greg Allen the following day. Following that, I called my wife to arrange picking up the kids from school. My mother had expressed a desire to have them for the long weekend, since they had no school on Friday. Thus, I planned to swing by the house around 3:45 to gather some belongings and transport the kids directly to Mom's. She enthusiastically approved, even suggesting we spend Saturday in bed together in her most seductive tone. I agreed nonchalantly before ending the call. I had reached a point where I couldn't tolerate her deceit any longer. I took my time returning home. By 12:30, I was parked nearby, awaiting the imminent events. My car was mostly concealed from view, but I had a clear line of sight to any vehicle entering my driveway. I didn't need to witness the garage door's movements. My wife and her lover were nothing if not predictable, and I was familiar with their routine. At 12:50, Sherry's car rolled into the driveway, followed 5 minutes later by Greg Allen's. The trap was set, and I was poised to ensnare them. I should have felt anguish knowing my wife and her boss were engaging in pleasure in our marital bed while I waited around the corner for them to finish. Yet, she had lost her ability to inflict pain upon me. It was astonishing how composed I felt as I envisioned the activities I knew they were engaging in together. It was almost reminiscent of recalling a low-budget adult film, lacking in substance but with a satisfying conclusion around 10 minutes to 3. I observed Alan's car reverse out of the driveway and depart. 10 minutes later, Sherry followed suit. Sweet. As she drove off, I observed her applying fresh lipstick. Once they were out of sight, I pulled into my garage and shut the door. With limited time on my hands, I headed to my office and reviewed the footage from that afternoon's encounter. Everything was captured, including the hurtful insults about his superiority in bed compared to me. However, this time, their words didn't affect me. After ensuring the footage was securely stored on my hard drive, I spent the next 10 minutes carrying my handcrafted signs, adorned with their photographs, upstairs and positioning them near the front door for easy access. Then, I packed essentials like a toothbrush and clothes for Shelby and Ryan into my car. The only remorse I felt about my impending actions was for the pain I was about to inflict on my beloved children. Yet, I found solace in knowing I hadn't caused the pain of their parents' separation. That responsibility rested solely on their mother's shoulders. She chose to engage in a prolonged affair, ultimately tearing our family apart. At 3:15, I drove to their school and was waiting when the final bell rang to pick them up. I informed them they'd spend the weekend with Grandma, which thrilled them given her penchant for spoiling them. 45 minutes later, I dropped them off and returned home, ready to set my plan in motion. And thus, we come full circle to where we began. Bed, table, and rug displayed on the lawn adorned with signs, watched by neighbors, awaiting Sherry's return to the dreadful truth that I held all the knowledge. That night, I expected to hear from Sherry, but I didn't. There was a late call from her cell phone, but when I answered, silence greeted me. An hour after Sherry departed, the police paid me a visit. While understanding, they insisted I remove the signs and photographs to avoid disturbing the peace and public indecency charges. I complied. They served their purpose, seen by my wife, and from the look on her face before I turned away, I knew her life had begun its descent into chaos. That evening I drowned my sorrows in a substantial amount of Maker's Mark and drifted into an alcoholic stupor. Friday morning greeted me with a monstrous hangover, yet despite it, I felt empowered. Though saddened and alone, I found strength in knowing I had subdued my anger long enough to exact revenge on my unfaithful wife and her lover. By noon, I glimpsed out the front window to find the rug, kitchen table, and bed gone, leaving only the mattress and stained sheets behind. I'd dispose of those later. The morning passed uneventfully, but by 3 p.m, chaos erupted. I was certain that Greg Adams' wife had received the letter and photographs that morning, and my lawyer had informed me that both Sherry and Greg Adams, along with his partners, had been served at their workplaces. He recounted how Sherry collapsed in tears upon being served, while Greg Adams disregarded her, unleashing threats against me. His partners retreated behind closed doors for 15 minutes before emerging to present Sherry with her final check and informing Greg that his partnership was terminated. When he informed them of his refusal to sell to them, they cited their corporate bylaws morality clause regarding love fraternization with staff members. This provision empowered them to sever all ties with him and his mistress. Concurrently, the receptionist at the front desk relayed that his wife was on the phone, urgently requesting to speak with him. She had received a letter and photos I had sent, informing him not to return home and notifying him of her intent to file for divorce the following day. Later, I was informed by one of the agency employees' husbands that after Adams was escorted out of the building, everyone turned their backs on my soon-to-be ex-wife. She remained on the floor for about 30 minutes, crying inconsolably. Eventually, she gathered herself enough to leave, though no one knew her whereabouts. The next day, Sherry finally called me, sounding distraught. She inquired about the children and whether they knew about the situation. I assured her they were safe at my mother's and wouldn't hear the details from me. She thanked me for my discretion and asked to retrieve some belongings, to which I agreed, offering to leave for a few hours. She requested to stay and talk, but I declined, leading to more tears from her. She pleaded for my understanding, expressing remorse and claiming she never intended to hurt me. I laughed at her apology, questioning how she could claim innocence when she had expressed love and longing for her lover, comparing him favorably to me. I accused her of betraying me with her words to him, saying I had recordings of her confessing these feelings. Despite her denial, I insisted that her words were recorded, and nothing she said could change how I felt about her. She professed her love for me, claiming she had always loved only me, and didn't understand why she said those things to Greg. She explained that she had done it to boost his ego because he complained about his wife. I questioned her explanation, pointing out that she had torn me down to him and had lovemaking with him for 6 months. She insisted she never meant to hurt me and didn't mean any of it. When I pressed her for an explanation, she admitted that it felt dirty with Greg and that she felt she should be dirty with him, keeping it separate from what she had with me, which she described as loving and clean. I expressed disbelief at her actions and called her sick, admitting my own foolishness for not seeing it sooner. She begged for a chance to make it right, insisting that she loved only me and belonged to me. She pleaded for forgiveness and offered to come to me immediately, begging me not to leave her. I informed Sherry that I no longer loved her and that she was the one who left me. I condemned her actions with Greg over the past 6 months, stating that her behavior proved she didn't love me. I expressed disgust towards her and eagerly awaited her departure from my life. I rejected any possibility of reconciliation, expressing my disdain for her after what she had done with Greg. I emphasized that any future interaction would only be for the sake of our children, whom she had also damaged. I explained that while I wanted to spare our children pain, I had no intention of sparing her any consequences for her actions. I wanted her to feel the same pain she had caused me and Greg's wife. When she questioned why I told Greg's wife about their affair, I retorted that what she and Greg did was unfair to me and our children. I justified informing Greg's wife by highlighting the destruction of my family, the betrayal of our marital vows, and the need for Greg's wife to know the truth. Sherry expressed her desire to fight for our marriage, stating that she didn't want a divorce. I responded by saying there was nothing left to fight for and that I would rather die than remain married to her. I accused her of being delusional and out of her mind. She urged me to read the divorce petition she served me with, claiming that if I agreed to joint custody for our children, I could stay in the house and receive half of our assets. However, she threatened to share the videos of her affair if I didn't agree to her terms. When I doubted her willingness to follow through with the threat, she insisted that she could and would do it out of hatred towards me. She pleaded with me to sign the divorce papers, but I remained firm in my decision. In the end, she begged me to sign the papers, but I refused, insisting that she should sign them instead. After hanging up on her, Sherry signed the divorce papers, and the divorce was finalized in 6 months. She now lives with Shelby and Ryan in our former home, while I reside in a nearby condo. Despite the divorce, we remained in the same school district to minimize disruption for the kids, although they still felt the pain of the breakup. Shelby disclosed that their mother acknowledged her mistake, accepting that our marriage couldn't overcome it. However, we reassured the kids that we would always be there for them. As for what Sherry told her parents and sister about the breakup, I'm uncertain, but they still communicate with me, indicating she likely didn't place blame solely on me. My mother perceived the divorce as something neither Sherry nor I could move past. I had the chance to retrieve the audio recorder from Sherry's car one last time, capturing a memorable conversation. She called Greg and thanked him for their time together, expressing concern about my suspicions and suggesting they pause their affair temporarily. Upon arriving home, she discovered signs and photographs revealing my knowledge of her infidelity, leading to her panic and realization of the consequences. She called Greg in distress, informing him that I knew everything about their affair, and broke down into tears. It's been over a year since we endured those trying times, and gradually, I'm beginning to piece things back together. I still steer clear of dating, and will likely continue to do so for a while. The idea of reliving what I've just gone through makes me wary of diving into another serious relationship. Shelby mentioned that her mom went on one date but returned home in tears, and as far as she knows, hasn't dated since. Sherry found work as a receptionist in a retirement village and has put her real estate career on hold, at least for now. I've never found out if she keeps in touch with Greg Allen, and frankly, I don't care. Greg Allen and his wife divorced, and he's been struggling to find employment. Even though I didn't share the videos of their closeness encounters with anyone, Sherry knew I wasn't sympathetic towards Greg. It seems many businesses are wary of hiring someone with a reputation for seducing married women and causing marriages to dissolve. Although I blurred Sherry's face in the videos, I retained all the audio. I recently heard that Greg's ex-wife is dating a kind police officer, and it appears to be serious. Good for her. Speaking of Greg's former employer, to avoid negative publicity, they offered me a generous settlement to prevent a lawsuit. I accepted. As far as I'm concerned, that chapter is closed for now. My focus is solely on my children and their future. Perhaps one day, my own future will take precedence as well.
On Thursday, April 17, 2019, at 4:35 p.m., inside the USC General Justice Building at Joint Base Grissom, I finished my coffee and checked my watch. The day had dragged on, and I was eager for it to end. After 3 hours of testifying and answering questions, I found myself in a cramped room with just a TV and my thoughts for company. I'd been waiting for over 2 hours since then, wondering when the board would reach a decision. The door swung open, and Commander Tom Baker, my legal rep, stepped in. "The counsel's done for the day, Lieutenant Jones," he informed me. That's me, William Jones, or Bill, to friends and family. I'm a senior flight lieutenant in the United States Space Corps, formerly the Space Force, established nearly 80 years ago. They want you back at 8 o'clock tomorrow, so head back to your quarters, Commander Baker instructed. And remember, avoid chatting with other witnesses, especially your wife. You mean my soon-to-be ex-wife, the cheating one? I clarified. He nodded. Exactly, he affirmed. Now, Lieutenant, get going and steer clear of trouble. Aye, sir, I replied, rising. I stretched, grabbed my case, and left. I drove my compact electric car back to the BOQ, where I changed clothes, microwaved a faux meat burger, and grabbed a beer. After a quick meal, I settled into my chair, turned on the TV for news, but found nothing interesting. So I reclined, reflecting on recent weeks. Until recently, I served as the weapons officer on the USS Armstrong, a top spacecraft named after a moon landing astronaut. It seated 110 crew and boasted formidable firepower, nuclear missiles, energy weapons, railguns, and mini lasers. The Armstrong's maiden voyage to Jupiter was special because my wife, Tabitha, was also on board as the chief pilot. We were high school sweethearts who pledged exclusivity and shared dreams of space exploration. Despite being stationed at the same base, our missions often separated us. While she was away, I delved into GravTac, a martial art suited for low-gravity environments, honing my skills in strength and tactical prowess. I never once doubted Tabby's loyalty. My trust in her was unwavering, never even entertaining the idea of her being unfaithful. Despite occasional temptations, I remained dedicated to our relationship, never envisioning any betrayal. We often fantasized about experiencing closeness in zero gravity on the Moon or Mars. When we both received orders for the Armstrong, it felt like our dreams were coming true. However, what began as a dream turned into an agonizing nightmare. I vividly recall the day of my departure. Friday, January 3rd, 2019, at Canaveral Launch Complex, Florida. Clad in my suit and lost in thought, I boarded the passenger shuttle headed for the Armstrong's orbital dock, accompanied by 20 others. Tabby, serving as the chief pilot, had departed hours earlier on the first shuttle. I followed on the third, with 3 more shuttles set to follow. Seated beside me was Commander Jason Travers, known as Bull for his size and demeanor. I remembered him from our academy days. He had been Tabby's counselor and a strict instructor. Despite knowing him, our interactions were minimal, limited to a few classes. "Excited to serve with your wife, Jones?" asked Bull. "Yes, sir, I am," I replied. "This will make history," he remarked. "Heading farther than ever," I informed him. "Jupiter and back in under 100 days. Quite the mission." As the pumps hummed beneath us, signaling our imminent departure from Earth, Bull ensured everyone was ready. "Time to bid Earth goodbye." "That's it, let it go," he grumbled before reclining. With visors down, we braced for liftoff. The rocket's rumble and the pull of gravity intensified. Through the window, clouds rushed past as we ascended, the sky darkening to reveal the planet's curvature below. The shuttle shuddered as boosters detached, destined for reuse near our launch site. After an hour, I spotted a distant structure. "There she is," Bull announced, lifting his visor. "Docking soon." 30 minutes later, the shuttle approached the open dock, matching its speed. 2 tubular structures extended, connecting with a hiss as pressure stabilized. "There we go," Bull said. "Prepare for some gravity. Ship's at 0.8 G. Knowing the Armstrong's gravity system could be adjusted, I anticipated relief from weightlessness effects like fluid shifts and muscle atrophy. As the crew signaled, a green light flashed over the hatches. Bull stood, signaling others to follow. I unfastened, grabbed my bag, adjusting to the ship's reduced gravity from the shuttle's near-zero gravity. Within steps, I felt the weight of my gear. 4 hours to station launch, folks," Bull announced upon our ship entry. "Let's hustle. 3 more shuttles are right behind us." Knowing our cabin's location, I headed there, hopeful to find Tabby. Though she wasn't present, her belongings filled half the closet, indicating she'd arrived. After stowing my gear and shedding the spacesuit for my flight suit, I grabbed my uniform cap and headed to the bridge, ready to man the weapons console. The bridge buzzed with activity as I ran calibration routines and checked weapon inventories. Ensuring cruise missile platforms and weapon stations were secure, I prepared a report for Captain Alan Simmons, whom I recognized from our time on the Shepherd. Upon the medic's departure, I submitted my inventory, acknowledging our past service together. He signed the inventory, and we verified our key codes. Only 3 people held keys to the cruise missiles: the captain, the first officer, and me. 2 keys were required to launch. "Good to have you with us, Jones," Captain Simmons said. I hear you're married to our chief pilot. Tabby smiled at this. Yes, sir, I replied. Great, Alan said. Should make the trip more interesting for you. Yes, sir, I hope so, I said, glancing at Tabby, who smiled mischievously before returning to her tasks. Bull arrived on the bridge, inspecting everything. His icy stare signaled it was time for me to return to my post. Better get back to my station, sir. Alan nodded and moved on. I returned to my station, confirming all calibration tasks were complete. Everything was in perfect order. Knowing Captain Simmons' penchant for impromptu weapons drills from our time on the Shepherd, I ensured weapons were always ready and the targeting system was calibrated. Each shift started with a calibration check to maintain system accuracy unless a malfunction occurred. Finally, Alan began the pre-launch check while we strapped in. Operative, he called. All systems ready for launch, replied Lieutenant Sam. Engineering, Alan continued. All systems normal. Proceed to launch, said Chief Engineer Lieutenant Sam. Weapons? All systems calibrated and weapons accounted for, I confirmed. Comms? Communications 5x5, sir, said Lieutenant Denise Simpson. Navigation? Course plotted and locked. ETA at Mars Station is 440 hours, reported Lieutenant Ryan Halcomb. Number 1, all personnel in place and ready for launch, Bull reported. Alan nodded and pressed a console button. Houston, this is Armstrong, requesting permission to launch. Launch authorization granted, Armstrong. Godspeed, came the response. Roger that, Houston, Alan replied, then instructed. Spaddock, this is Armstrong. Retract all lines. Copy that, Armstrong. Lines retracting, came the reply, followed by sharp sounds as the lines retracted. Moments later, we received confirmation that all lines were retracted. Start the engines, Alan ordered. Engines running, Brian confirmed. Take us out, helmsman. Nice and easy. Don't scratch the paint, Alan said with a smile. Aye, sir, Tabby responded, pulling 2 levers and holding the control column. The ship moved forward slowly, nearing the spaceport exit. We relied on maneuvering thrusters, as firing the ion fusion plasma thrusters inside the dock would damage both it and the Armstrong. Soon, we were clear of the structure. The space dock is ready, Tabby said. We'll spiral out of Earth orbit to a point between Earth and the Moon, then fire the big engines. That's the Q spot, she explained. I could see the tracking on the navigator's console. An hour later, the navigator announced, ETA to Q point is 2 microns, sir. The road is clear. This meant no debris or rocks were detected ahead. Copy that, Alan said. Engineering? Engines warmed up and ready, sir, Brian confirmed. Alan informed Houston. Armstrong approaching point Q. Approaching Q point. Copy that, Armstrong, came the response. We watched the countdown timers, preparing for the launch. At 0 o'clock, Alan said, Pump up the tires and light a fire, helmsman. Let's see what this girl can do. Tabby's hands moved over the console. Kicking tires, starting fires. Aye, sir, she replied, sliding the control levers forward. As the engines roared to life, the force of acceleration gripped us, the hum intensifying with each surge of G-force. We soared at speeds surpassing any human's experience. Casting a glance at Tabby, I beamed with pride, offering a smile, a wink, and a thumbs up. Returning the smile, she glanced at Bull. Sensing Bull's tension, I redirected my focus to my console. An hour later, a foreboding feeling crept in. Bull's posting of the officer's schedule on the bridge didn't surprise me, but seeing myself assigned to the second shift did. In space, time follows Houston's schedule, with dimming lights simulating nighttime during the second shift. While it's not a formal rule, typically, senior officers take the first shift. Seeing Bull place me on the second shift felt like a demotion, indicating limited time for Tabby and me to be together since she'd be on the first shift. If fortunate, we might catch a glimpse of each other during shift changes. To say I was pissed off was an understatement, and Bull knew it. Is there a scheduling problem, Lieutenant? He asked. I looked up to see him in front of my console. Alice had also walked over, having seen the schedule and curious about his explanation. Am I still the senior weapons officer, sir? I asked. Yes, of course, Bull replied. Then why am I working the second shift? In my opinion, it's the best place for you, he said, drawing attention. If you have a scheduling problem, discuss it with the captain through me. By this time, Alan had approached. Is there a problem, gentlemen? He asked. Lieutenant Jones doesn't like the bridge schedule, sir, Bull said. Alan frowned at the schedule. I understand his feelings, number 1, he said. It's very unusual, don't you agree? Yes, sir. Normally I would, Bull said. But I believe Lieutenant Jones's knowledge and experience are best utilized on the second shift. It also gives us a chance to train other gunnery officers on the first shift. My crap detectors went off. I couldn't believe the crap he was feeding the captain. "Is that the only reason, Commander, or is there more?" Alan asked, clearly skeptical. "If I may speak freely, sir," Bull said quietly. "Always number one," Alan replied. "I've never liked spouses working on the same ship, especially in close quarters. I don't want them distracted from their duties." "That's what I thought," Alan said. "I understand, but I won't let this affect their morale. Make sure they spend time together. Understood?" "Yes, sir," Bull said. Alan looked at me. "Can you do that, Lieutenant?" "Yes, sir," I replied. "Good, carry on," Alan said, walking away. Bull smirked at me. "Don't worry, Jones. I'll keep an eye on your wife," he said before leaving. I turned to Alice, who put a finger to her lips. "Don't say anything, Bill," she said. "We'll talk later. I'll call Lieutenant Robinson." "Yes, ma'am," I said quietly. I glanced at Tabby, who was focused on her console, her face flushed. I couldn't tell if it was from embarrassment or guilt. I left the bridge feeling more humiliated than ever. Something was definitely off. I headed to the galley, hoping to grab something to eat. It wasn't a usual meal time, so I knew the selection would be limited. "Not much available right now, Lieutenant," said the man behind the plexiglass partition. "We have hamburgers made of artificial meat. They taste terrible, but they'll fill you up." "That'll do," I said. He handed me one on a tray and offered a packet of flavored ketchup. "Want some axle grease to make it better?" he asked with a smile. "Sure, why not?" I said, taking the packet. "Thanks." "Anytime, Lieutenant," he replied. I grabbed a small bottle of chocolate milk and found a vacant table. I ate the burger, drenched it in ketchup, and downed the milk. The burger tasted awful, but it filled me up, and the ketchup helped a bit. I put the tray away, tossed the trash, and headed back to my quarters. I lay down, trying to sleep, but couldn't stop thinking about Bull. What did he mean about looking after Tabby? After an hour of tossing and turning, I gave up. Frustrated, I put on my workout clothes and headed to the small gym on one of the lower decks. When I arrived, I was relieved to find the gym empty. Good, I thought. I could vent my frustration without anyone around. I stretched, worked out on the treadmill and weight machine, then adjusted the gravity to 0.4 G. Feeling lighter, I practiced some grav-tac techniques for half an hour. By then, I was sweaty and ready to sleep. I reset the gravity, returned to my quarters, showered in the tiny bathroom, set my alarm, and fell asleep instantly. When the alarm went off, I got up, showered, shaved, dressed, and headed to the galley for a snack. It was much better than the faux meat burger I had earlier. I arrived at the bridge just as Tabby was leaving. "Hello, stranger," I said. She looked at me and smiled. "Hi," she said. "I didn't get a chance to tell you, but you did a great job with the launch," I said. "Thank you," she replied. "Maybe I'll come by during my lunch break and we can spend some time together," I suggested. I could see her thinking it over, expecting her to make an excuse. Thankfully, she didn't. "Sure, I'll set the alarm," she said. "Maybe you can eat me instead of one of those fake burgers." "Works for me," I said. "I'll see you in 6 hours." "I'll be there," she said, giving me a quick kiss. I love you too," I replied. I watched her walk away, hopeful we could make it work. Then I turned and saw Bull grinning. "About damn time you showed up, Jones," he said. I checked my watch. "My shift doesn't start for another 15 minutes, Commander," I said. "I just wanted to talk to my wife before duty, if that's okay with you, sir." I thought he might lash out, but he calmed down. "Yeah, all right," he said, and walked down the corridor. I went onto the bridge and took over for Lieutenant Robinson, who handed me my shift and walked out. As I started the calibration, Alice approached me. "How are you holding up?" she asked. "I'll be fine, Alice," I said. "Seriously, how are you doing?" she pressed. "It's not easy, but I can handle it." "Thanks for asking." "You're welcome. Listen, I know you have a lot on your mind, but I think you need to keep an eye on your wife and Commander Travers," she said. I looked at her, shocked. "Do you think there's something going on between them?" "Maybe. Call it female intuition, but I've seen little glances between them. Nothing obvious, but there's definitely a spark," she explained. "Got it, Alice. Thanks for the heads up. I plan to meet with her on my lunch break. Hope that helps." "I hope so too, Bill," she said. "Should we tell the captain?" I asked. She shook her head. "Not unless you have solid evidence. Accusing a senior officer without proof can backfire and hurt your career. Just stay alert and keep your wife alert. I'll watch during the first shift." "Okay, Alice, thanks." She nodded and left the bridge. I checked the calibration and inspected the cruise missiles and weapon stations. When I returned, Alan was waiting. "Interested in target practice?" he asked. "Sure thing," I agreed. "All right, Launch some drones, he instructed. I set up 5 drones and activated the mini lasers, akin to old miniguns but with intense heat. The lasers swiftly destroyed the drones. Well done, Lieutenant, Allen praised. Thanks, sir, I replied. He suggested I'd take the center chair as the senior officer on watch while he rested. Yes, sir, thank you, I acknowledged, knowing his knack for power naps from past experience. He left the bridge, and I took over his spot. Sitting in the commander's chair, I felt in control, overseeing the ship's activities. Each crew member wore a wrist device, serving multiple functions like timekeeping, communication, tracking, and vital sign monitoring, except during showers. Using the tracking monitor, I located Travers in his quarters, confirmed by his steady pulse indicating he wore the device. Checking for Jones, I found 2 Williams, myself, and Tabitha. Choosing Tabitha, I observed her beacon in our quarters, mirroring Travers' status, asleep with normal vitals. Though tempted to review their tracker history, lacking necessary credentials prevented me. Convinced of their engagement, I deactivated the tracking monitor and focused on other tasks. Looking around the busy bridge, it seemed my presence went unnoticed as everyone attended to their duties. Returning to my console, I double-checked the checklist, finding everything operating as expected. A scheduled course adjustment loomed about an hour ahead, already programmed into the navigation system. The communications officer remained in touch with Houston's flight control, sparing my involvement unless immediate captain intervention was needed. The engineer on duty monitored engine and vital system conditions. The helmsman and navigator ensured smooth ship flight, especially for the impending course correction. After logging the hour's activities, I briefly inspected the weapons console before returning to the central chair. About 2 hours into the shift, Petty Officer Marks took drink orders from everyone, allowing beverages with covers and straws at our stations. After a brief absence, she returned with drinks for all. Shortly before my lunch break, Allen resumed his seat, where I briefed him on the shift's progress. He acknowledged, making notes in his journal. "Thank you, Lieutenant," he said, gesturing for me to take my break with a subtle wink. "Yes, sir," I replied, stepping away from my post. Heading to our shared quarters, I paused at the open hatch, taking a deep breath before entering. Tabby had just woken up to the alarm. "Ready for dinner?" she asked with defiance. Smiling, I joined her on the bed. "Absolutely," I said, initiating affectionate gestures. Subsequently, we shared an carnal moment. "That was amazing," she expressed. "Much needed." "Agreed. Missed you," I confessed. "Missed you too. Love you so much," she reciprocated. "Love you too," I replied. "Time to clean up and head back?" she reminded. Checking the time, I realized there were about 40 minutes left in the break. "You're right," I acknowledged. "Round 2 during your lunch break?" she suggested with a smile. "Definitely," I agreed. Feeling somewhat improved, I rose, showered swiftly, and headed to the galley. Before exiting the cabin, I kissed her, then adjusted the lighting and reduced the gravity to 0.7 Gs, knowing my grasp of gravtalk was crucial for our performance, an area where Bull lacked expertise. Lovemaking in space is far from the movie's portrayals. In microgravity, blood moves to the head, not the genitals. Fortunately, the ship's default gravity of 0.8 G allowed us some enjoyment, though it remained challenging. Lower gravity could have made it impossible. Testosterone levels decrease in microgravity, potentially leading to heart shrinkage and reduced blood volume. These concerns, along with pregnancy risks, once deterred NASA from sending couples to space. However, tales of romantic escapades persist, like the rumored exploits of a cosmonaut on the Russian Mir station in the 1990s. Despite initial denials, the cosmonaut later admitted to natural desires, but downplayed their significance. He even mentioned a superior's suggestion to bring an inflatable doll to prevent attachment. Although old restrictions lingered, advancements like artificial gravity in the early 2000s made many concerns obsolete. Consequently, the Corps relaxed its stance, allowing married couples to engage in space closeness under specific conditions. After a satisfying tuna sandwich, I returned to the bridge with 2 minutes to spare before the break. Allen greeted me, asking about my lunch. Satisfied, I settled at my console as instructed. Over the next 17 days, Tabby often visited during lunch breaks, offering comfort during the journey. Minimal interaction with Bull eased concerns, and updates from Alice revealed no suspicious activity. Upon arrival at Mars Station, doubts crept in about my initial reaction. After docking with Mars Station, I changed into my Class C uniform, hoping for shore leave with Tabby at Huygens Base. However, my plans were disrupted when Bull informed me of a problem with one or more weapon stations. "What?" I exclaimed, surprised. Just hours ago during my shift, I had checked them and found no issues. I turned to Lieutenant Robinson asking if he knew of any problems. He indicated it happened right before docking. Feeling suspicious, I was determined to investigate further. "We've got 72 hours here," Bull reminded me. "Make sure those weapons are ready by launch." Disheartened, I glanced at Tabby. "It'll be okay," she reassured me. "We'll still visit Huygens. I'll bring you back a souvenir, all right?" Bull smirked. "Don't worry, Jones. I'll watch over your wife," he assured me. "Yeah, I bet you will, you idiot," I thought. Alan approached us. "Ready for some beach time?" he asked. "Yes," Bull replied. "But Jones needs to check the weapon systems." "Any issues?" Alan inquired. "The mini laser's calibration was disrupted, sir," Robinson explained. "When did this happen?" Alan asked. "I noticed it before securing the station," Robinson replied. Alan turned to me. "Better take a look, Lieutenant," he directed. "I'll join you," he added. "Thank you, sir," I said, glancing at Bull. "I appreciate it." "I'll assist, Lieutenant," Robinson offered. "Much obliged, Robinson," I replied. "Let's head to the station before the shuttles depart," Bull urged. Tabby looked at me silently. "Do it, number one," Alan instructed. They left, and I noticed Tabby's silence. I turned to Alice. "Something's fishy, Bill," she whispered. "I'll keep watch." "Thanks," I replied. She smiled and walked away. "I'll change into my work clothes," I said. "Which lasers are acting up?" "Number 2 and number 5, sir," Robinson reported. "I'll handle 2. You check 5, but we'll inspect them all," I instructed. "Understood, sir," Robinson said, heading out. I saw Alan contemplating. "I'll meet you at Laser Station 2, I informed him. "I'll be there shortly," he replied. Grabbing my tools, I exited the bridge. After a few minutes, Alan joined me, now back in his work uniform. "What's happening?" he inquired. "Just about to remove the control box cover," I replied, beginning to unscrew it. Upon inspection, I discovered the issue. A gear in the drive system had broken off, with the E-clip missing. "Uh-oh," I muttered. "What's wrong?" Alan asked. "Someone tampered with this device," I explained. "The E-clip is gone and the drive gear is damaged." "Could it have affected the weapons?" he questioned. "Absolutely," I confirmed. "The impact could have wrecked the system. If the lasers were active, they might have pierced the hull." "How could this happen?" he wondered. "It seems deliberate," I speculated. "These devices are sealed, accessible only with a specific tool, like this one," I said, displaying it. "Can it be fixed?" he inquired. "Yes, but it'll take time," I replied. "About 8 to 10 hours, assuming no further issues arise." "Wow," he remarked. "Need assistance?" While I appreciated his offer, the task was solo. "No, sir, I can handle it, but thanks for offering," I said. "There's only space for one set of hands." Just then, Robinson contacted me. "Boss, the E-clip's broken, and the drive gear's damaged," he reported. I turned to Alan. "We need to replace the entire control box," I informed him. "Agreed," he nodded. "Proceed, and get the armory to inspect all weapon platforms." "Understood," Robinson acknowledged. "What are the odds of 2 control units failing simultaneously?" queried Alan. "Highly unlikely," I responded. "These units are typically very reliable. I've never seen one malfunction, let alone 2 simultaneously. They're considered the most stable in our inventory." "Could it be a manufacturing flaw?" he suggested. "Doubtful, sir," I replied. "These units undergo rigorous testing before installation. In my experience with hundreds of them, I've never encountered such a situation." "I'll need to notify Houston," Alan decided. "Let's bring in engineers from the Martian station and postpone a full Level 5 diagnostic. It's absurd that a $1 trillion spacecraft could be halted by a cheap E-clip." I nodded. "Keep me informed," I instructed. "Yes, sir," I affirmed. As he exited the cramped space, I resumed my examination. Upon removing the control box entirely, I noticed a dark stain on the interior hull. It wasn't typical transmission grease. Upon closer inspection, it appeared to be blood. The saboteur had evidently injured themselves in the process. Retrieving tweezers from the toolbox, I carefully collected a sample of the substance. I placed it in a small sealed bag and returned it to the toolkit, planning to have it tested for DNA at a medical facility later. Meanwhile, an armorer replaced the faulty control box. Despite trying to focus on my task, I couldn't shake off the disturbing thoughts. Bull seemed to go out of his way to separate Tabby and me, altering schedules and now this sabotage. His words about taking care of Tabby only fueled my suspicions. The idea of her being unfaithful with him made me furious and sick to my stomach. Knowing Bull had been her counselor at the academy and that they had served together before intensified my concerns. Had something been going on between them all along? After completing the installation and running a dry test, I logged the maintenance entry, lamenting the 10 hours lost that were meant for shore leave with Tabby. Reviewing the log, I found no clues. Robinson confirmed the new unit installation and reported no other issues. Despite knowing it would disrupt his shore leave, I instructed him to conduct a full visual inspection and inventory of all weapons and missiles. He agreed and got to work. En route to the bridge, I visited sickbay and spoke with the on-duty corpsman. "How are you, Lieutenant Jones?" she greeted me. "Would you be willing to undergo a DNA test?" I inquired. "We have the necessary equipment, but final analysis requires verification by a certified lab," she explained. I presented my sample. "I need to identify whose blood this is," I stated. "Can you do that?" "Certainly," she replied. "It will take a few hours, and we'll need to compare it to existing DNA records. May I ask why?" "I can't discuss it at the moment, Chief," I replied. "I just need to know whose it is, and I need you to keep it confidential." She agreed to look into it and promised to notify me of any findings. "Thanks, Chief. I appreciate it," I expressed gratitude. "You're welcome, sir," she responded with a smile. She was quite attractive, and for a moment, I pondered how she would look out of uniform. But the thought passed quickly. Afterward, I proceeded to the bridge to give my report. Alan was at the hatch to his ready room when I arrived. "Fixed it?" he inquired. "Yes, sir," I confirmed. "Lieutenant Robinson is currently checking the remaining systems." "All right, step into my office, please," he directed. Inside, I found Alice and Commander Carson, the ship's senior security officer. Alan closed the hatch and took his seat. "Thank you for your prompt response," he acknowledged, addressing Alice and Commander Carson. "We have a situation. It seems we have a saboteur aboard," Alan informed. 2 weapon systems were sabotaged before our arrival at Mars Station. I've been tasked by Command to conduct an initial investigation and to contact the Core Criminal Investigations Division on Huygens. They won't arrive for at least 36 hours, so you have that time to gather as much information as possible. I'm granting both of you access to the entire tracker history temporarily. I need to know who accessed those weaponized units as soon as possible. This investigation must be thorough yet discreet. Understand? We can't have the crew finding out," he emphasized. "We understand, sir," confirmed Commander Carson. "In the meantime, a team of Mars engineers is conducting full Level 5 diagnostics on the ship. It'll take about 72 hours. Command doesn't want us departing with a potential saboteur on board, and I concur. The mission might be canceled," Alan explained. "Any questions?" "Just one, sir," I interjected, drawing everyone's attention. "Yes, Lieutenant," Alan prompted. "I discovered blood on the replaced control box housing. I sent a sample to sickbay for DNA analysis," I reported. "Good call," Alan commended. "I'll speak with Chief Benson about it. Anything else?" We shook our heads. "Dismissed. You have your tasks," Alan concluded. "Yes, sir," Commander Carson affirmed. Exiting the ready room, I secured my tool bag on the weapons console. As I prepared to depart the bridge, Alice called out to me. "Yes, ma'am," I responded. "Bill, I've been monitoring Tabby and Commander Travers. It seems they're quite familiar with each other," she disclosed, showing me her phone with pictures. Shocked, I saw Tabby and Bull entering a club hand in hand, dancing, drinking, and engaging in carnal behavior. Then Alice revealed images of them entering a hotel, implying their intentions were clear. "I'm sorry, Bill," she murmured softly. "I felt you needed to know." "Thank you, Alice," I replied, struggling to hold back tears. "Will you inform the captain?" she inquired. "I have no choice but to report it," she affirmed. "But I wanted you to hear it first." "I appreciate that," I acknowledged. Leaving the bridge, I caught up with Robinson. We completed the remaining system checks and conducted an inventory. My shift ended and I grabbed a snack in the galley before returning to my quarters, attempting to sleep. It was difficult with thoughts of Tubby and Bull swirling in my mind, but I managed to stay awake for a while. Eventually I rose, showered, dressed, and as I prepared to leave, Tabby entered the cabin, appearing refreshed with a glow that often followed closeness. A part of me seethed with anger. "Did you enjoy yourselves?" I asked calmly. "Yes, we did," she replied. "Just returned. Sorry you couldn't join. Maybe next time." I remained silent, observing her. "What were all the engineers doing on the station?" she inquired. "Routine maintenance," I replied. "What's your plan now?" she asked. "I'm going to rest for a bit." Exhausted and off duty for the next 12 hours. Are you starting your shift? I questioned. Yes, I affirmed. Did you resolve the issue? She inquired. I believe so, I responded. Good, she said. Missed you out there. Really? That's not the impression I got, I retorted. What do you mean? She asked. I heard you and Bull had fun, I stated. Anything you want to share? We danced, had a few drinks, but that's it, she insisted. Nothing else? I probed. Of course not, she exclaimed, pretending surprise. Why would you think that? Nothing, I said. I have to get to work. As I moved towards the door, Tabby halted me. She attempted to kiss me, but I turned my head, receiving a kiss on the cheek. Bill, I love you, she expressed. What's wrong? You tell me, I replied, leaving the cabin without awaiting her response. I questioned myself about the woman's identity. Did she truly believe she could approach me after being with someone else and expect no reaction? Did she think I wouldn't see through her deception? Upon reaching my station, I noticed Bull's absence. Continuing with my tasks, I carried on with diagnostics. After about 7 hours, realizing I hadn't eaten, I took a lunch break. Deciding to visit Tabby in our quarters, I intended to discuss matters with her. However, upon opening the hatch, I was confronted with a sight no husband should witness. Tabby and Bull were on our bed. I noticed an increase in gravity, set at 0.9 G. They both turned to me as Tabby hastily disengaged. Bull, with a smirk, ordered me to shut the hatch, questioning my presence. As Bull dressed, he mocked me, asking if I lacked lovemaking education. After donning his flight suit, he suggested we talk and motioned for a walk. Addressing Tabby, he promised to return for further conversation. Tabby looked at me with sorrow. I'm sorry, Bill, she whispered. We'll discuss it later, I responded. Bull declined my question and motioned for me to follow him. Sensing trouble, I activated the video recording function on my suit. All our suits were equipped with a camera feature for such situations. I wanted this encounter documented due to my unease. Bull praised my idea of adjusting the gravity in my quarters as we walked. However, he revealed he had discovered my alterations soon after my arrival. When I inquired how long he had known, he corrected my phrasing with a smirk. Remaining silent, I urged him to continue. He shared that it began during his second year at the academy when he served as Tabby's counselor, claiming she had sought his help with a problem. He insinuated that she was susceptible to his charms. He laughed at his own remarks, thinking himself clever. I seethed with anger, but refrained from violence, mindful of my career. So you're always there for her, huh? I queried. Absolutely, Lieutenant, he responded. You've got a knack for investigation. Was that why you changed the bridge schedule? I pressed. You caught on, Jones, he admitted. And the weapon system sabotage? I continued. Between us, yes, he confirmed, air quoting, investigation. What's your next move? I inquired. Planning to injure me? He chuckled, guiding us into the elevator. Certainly not, Lieutenant, he assured. Would I take out an officer just for a fling? For now, yes, I retorted. He led me out of the elevator, insisting I was mistaken. According to his recent investigation, I discovered my wife's infidelity, grew distraught, sabotaged the weapon systems to frame her lover, and then took my own life when she revealed her intention to leave me. We halted at the starboard airlock, opposite our docked station. The inner hatch was open, all spacesuits removed, and he brandished a pistol. You figured it all out? I challenged. Absolutely, he smirked. Now into the airlock. You won't succeed, I countered. He scoffed. Who'll command believe? You, a failing husband, or me, a seasoned veteran? He retorted. Assessing the situation, I noted the gravity set at 0.8 G. Not ideal, but manageable. Seizing the moment, I leaped up, struck him twice, and locked him in the airlock. Angered, he demanded I release him. I have one question, Commander, I interjected. What? Did Tabitha know your plan? Of course, he affirmed. It was her idea. Now open the door. I won't say more, he warned, aiming his weapon at me. Now do it. Gazing at the controls, I responded, Yes, sir, and activated the button. His eyes widened as he realized. The outer door slid open, and he was thrust into the vacuum of space. Caught off guard, he struggled, knowing he had only seconds without a spacesuit. In the void, the air in his lungs would expand, causing immense pain. He would either freeze or suffocate within 15 seconds. I activated the comms, announcing, Man overboard, number 2 starboard airlock. Instantly, the alarm blared, drawing a crowd to the airlock. Alan and Alice rushed over, followed by Tabby. Commander Travers, sir, I said, handing him a drive with a video recording. He confessed to sabotaging the weapon and having an affair with Lieutenant Jones. He also planned to eliminate me and make it look like self-destruction. It's all here. "Bull!" Tabby exclaimed, peering into the airlock. By now, Bull's ejection had sent him into an unstable orbit around Mars, making recovery difficult. Turning to me, tears streaming down her face, she accused, "You eliminated him. You fool, I hate you." "That's enough, Lieutenant," Alan intervened, taking Tabby to the orderlies. "Take her to sickbay, then hand her over to security." He turned to me solemnly. "You're relieved of duty for the investigation. I'll handle it." "Yes, sir," I responded quietly. "All right, that's it," Alan commanded. "Back to work. We've done all we can here." He turned to Commander Carson. "Once she's settled, find her a berth away from the bridge. Reach out to Mars Station for Commander Travers' recovery." "Understood, sir," Carson replied, walking off. Alan then addressed Alice. "Looks like you're stepping up, Alice. You're my new number one until further notice. Adjust bridge duties accordingly. The mission's likely scrapped." "Yes, sir," she acknowledged. "We've wrapped our initial inquiry, sir. We need to go over our findings." "In my quarters, ASAP," he instructed. "Got it, sir," she affirmed, then turned to me. "I'm sorry, Bill," she offered. "You didn't deserve any of this." "Thanks, Commander," I replied, heading to my quarters. Sorting Tabby's belongings, I packed them in her duffel bag. I wanted her far from me, likely reassigned to the vacant chief pilot's cabin. Security later retrieved her things. I didn't inquire, nor did I care. I flipped the mattress and changed the soiled bedding, tossing the old linens into the laundry. With restricted access to my quarters, I settled at the computer console and filled out a divorce request based on infidelity. Since our marriage fell under JAG jurisdiction, the divorce process also involved them. There was no property or children to divide, and our incomes were equal, so support wasn't applicable. It was a straightforward split where she kept hers and I kept mine. After submitting the request, I awaited confirmation. Within 24 hours, 2 CIA agents from Huygens contacted me, hinting at a vengeful motive. During the interrogation, the JAG officer prevented me from making self-incriminating statements. I spent the next day on edge, avoiding crew interactions to sidestep gossip. While seated in my quarters, Alan and Alice arrived unexpectedly, alleviating my tension. "Lieutenant," Alan began, taking a seat. Alice joined, and I relaxed on the bed. "Mars Station recovered Commander Travers' body and confiscated the illegal firearm attached to him," Alan stated. "The CIU report confirms your actions as self-defense. Commander Travers was present at both sabotaged weapon stations, as shown in the tracking history logs," he continued. "Right before Lieutenant Robinson detected the calibration error," Alice added. "The DNA from the blood matches the commander's, along with his confession to you, proving his responsibility for the sabotage," Alan clarified. "Your wife claims ignorance, but she's detained as an accessory to Travers's plot against you. Possible conspiracy charges await her on Earth." "So we're heading back to Earth, sir?" I inquired. Alan affirmed, "Indeed, Bill. The mission's on hold for now. We'll face a board of inquiry upon return." "Can I resume duty?" I asked. After some persuasion, Houston agreed. "With 2 officers down, we need you on bridge duty. Can you handle ops and gunnery?" Alan questioned, turning to Alice for confirmation. "Yes, sir," I affirmed. "Good," he replied. "We launch in 12 hours, so make sure you're rested and ready." "Thank you, sir," I said. "May I speak with my wife? I need some answers." "Are you certain about this, Bill?" he inquired. "Absolutely, sir," I confirmed. After a brief pause, he consented. "All right, Bill," he agreed. "But Commander Brewster will accompany you. Do you agree, Alice?" "Yes, sir," she confirmed. "Very well," he concluded. "Now, get to work, then rest up. It's time you earned your paycheck." "Yes, sir," I responded. As he left, Alice turned to me. "Ready, Lieutenant?" she asked. I nodded. "Yes, ma'am," I replied. We exited and headed to the brig on the lower deck. "Just so you know, Captain Simmons has commended you," she informed me. "For what?" I questioned, surprised. "He believes your actions saved lives, preventing potential damage to the ship had Travers fired the weapon in the airlock," she explained. "Damn," I muttered. She grinned. "Congrats," she said. We arrived at the brig and checked in with the on-duty security officer before approaching a small cell where Tabby sat on the bed, clad in an orange jumpsuit. "What's up, Lieutenant?" she sneered. "So now it's just Lieutenant, not even Bill or Lieutenant Jones," I remarked. "Fine, prisoner. I'll ask a few questions and then leave you be." "Go ahead, Lieutenant," she replied, staring ahead without glancing at me. "How long were you involved with Travers?" "Since sophomore year at the academy. she admitted. He was my counselor. I know, I acknowledged. Where did it start? Do you really want to know? She challenged. Yeah, I do, I affirmed. All right, since you asked. I failed a test. He helped me cheat. I owed him, so I entertained him. I enjoyed it, so it kept happening, she explained. So you cheated with him and then betrayed me, is that it? Yes, she confessed. You don't know how many times I thought of him when I was with you. And you know what? I liked it. You know what else? What? I asked, feeling sickened. He's been places you couldn't reach. Surprised you could even feel me after him, she taunted. And you enjoyed working with him all those times. When we could, she admitted. You know it's hard to do in low gravity. That's why we did it before and after missions. Did you ever love me, or was it all a lie? I loved you, she admitted. But I enjoyed being with him too. It was just lovemaking, nothing more. You knew his plans once we boarded, didn't you? Yeah, I did. He wanted to stagger shifts so we wouldn't see each other much. But you found a way to talk to me, surprising both of us. So we decided to wait until Mars, she explained. And you were aware of the weapons sabotage. I knew he was up to something, but not the specifics, she confessed. Just that he wanted to stop your shore leave. We didn't think you'd escalate it to this extent, and my supposed self-destruction was a bonus, right? He blamed it on you. Was it? It was his idea, she stated. But you went along. You never intervened, did you? No, I didn't, she admitted quietly. And I'm sorry. I never thought he'd actually do it. He failed, and you'll end up in jail. Was it worth it? Doesn't matter, she shrugged. I was proud of you, how you handled the ship. I loved you. But now, I regret ever meeting you. I'll testify at your trial. Goodbye. As I turned, she called my name, apologizing. Without looking back, I raised my middle finger and walked away. Upon returning to Earth, Tabby was incarcerated in a federal prison for the duration of the investigation and court-martial. Crew members, including myself, Alan, and Alice, testified extensively, enduring days of waiting for developments. My divorce was approved in early April, with the JAG officer handling the remaining paperwork. On Friday, April 18th, we assembled in the hearing room. Alan, Alice, and I sat together while Tabby entered in chains, flanked by armed prison guards. Council members, distinguished by their decorated uniforms, joined the proceedings. Admiral Cartwright, leading the council, initiated the meeting. Please sit, he began, clarifying it as a board of inquiry rather than a trial, aimed at uncovering what occurred and preventing future incidents. After summarizing the events of the Mars trip, he condemned Commander Travers for prioritizing personal agendas over duty, resulting in endangerment and ship damage. Directing his attention to me, he acknowledged my role. Senior Lieutenant William Jones, he said, causing me to pause. After a moment, he continued, commending my actions for potentially saving lives and preventing sabotage. Recognizing my diligence, he approved the Distinguished Service Medal recommendation and assigned me to the Advanced Operations School for training starting June 1st. Thank you, sir, I said. The Admiral acknowledged and shifted focus to Alan. Captain Alan Simmons, he addressed. Alan stood attentively. The Council acknowledges your efforts amidst unprecedented circumstances. We recognize your reluctance to challenge senior authority and the unique challenges you've faced. However, as the ship's captain, you bear ultimate responsibility for its operations. I understand, Admiral, Alan replied. The Council affirms your command of the USS Armstrong, but notes an entry on your record. Given the ship's modernization, a new crew assignment will be arranged. We propose promoting Lieutenant Som Dr. Brewster to commander for the first officer role. Expect updated mission orders soon, he concluded. Thank you, Admiral, Alan acknowledged. Then the Admiral turned to Tabby. Senior Lieutenant Tabitha Abernathy, he addressed, using her maiden name post-divorce. Tabby rose with the others. This board expresses profound disappointment in your conduct. You've not only disgraced your ex-husband, but also tarnished your uniform and the service as a whole. Your involvement in this affair, unintended pun aside, may have endangered the lives of many, including your ex-husband. Your statements, along with Travers, led us to reassess your entire record, including your academy performance. Travers' intervention helped you pass a critical test without which you might not have obtained your commission. While your piloting record was commendable, it's evident you should not have been commissioned. Your liaison with Travers resulted in tragedy and endangered lives. Your actions are incompatible with your role. We recognize your pending court-martial, but this board has advised the personnel office to revoke your commission, demote you to an E1 crewman, and reduce your pay, effective immediately, he informed, signaling the guards to escort her out. As she approached us, she paused, tears streaming down her face. "Bill," she started, her voice trembling. "Address me cautiously, crewman," I retorted sharply. She straightened up, tears still flowing. "Request to address you as lieutenant denied," I snapped. "Remove her from my sight," I instructed the guards, who promptly complied as she sobbed. At that moment, her words held no significance to me. "A detailed report of the council's decisions will be sent to each of you and added to your records. This council session is adjourned," announced Admiral Cartwright, closing the meeting with a gavel strike. We rose as the council departed. After their departure, Alan turned to me. "Well, that wasn't too bad," he remarked. "How about a drink? I could use one." "I think it went rather well, sir," Alice chimed in. "Why not?" I agreed. We exited the premises and headed to the O Club, where we continued to savor our victory. Update. Standing at the airlock to Galileo Station, orbiting Mars's dark side, I reflected on the past 17 months. Tubby's court-martial had ended a month before I entered the School of Advanced Spacecraft Management. I testified for the prosecution, though recalling my time with her and Bull on Armstrong was unpleasant. This time, Tabby appeared different, wearing a crewman's uniform without flight wings. She had visibly lost weight, her eyes sunken and sorrowful. Losing everything she cherished, her rank, wings, and former husband, she faced a bleak career outlook. Her record would forever bear a stain, barring her from piloting any spacecraft. As the court convened, we rose until instructed otherwise. The judge inquired about the verdict, and the senior member, a full commander, announced guilt for Tabby as an accessory to my attempted homicide, but acquitted her of conspiracy. The defense argued a lack of direct evidence implicating her in the conspiracy. Yet it was clear she knew of Travers' plan to eject me into space and took no action to stop it. The judge sentenced her to 10 years of hard labor in federal prison, followed by a dishonorable discharge. With a gavel strike, the case concluded. Tabby left in chains, never acknowledging me. I attended my class in Florida near Cape Canaveral and relished the training, along with the pleasant weather and surroundings, which included plenty of exposed skin. Graduating after 18 months, I was promoted to lieutenant commander and received orders to Galileo, a secluded station orbiting Mars. Unlike the visible Mars station, I was intrigued by what lay ahead. Upon arrival, I was greeted by Captain Hawkins, an attractive officer, who briefed me on the situation and assured me of a smooth transition. "Are you prepared to see your new home for the next few years?" she asked, leading me to the observation deck. Pressing a button, she revealed a massive, advanced ship, the USS Enterprise. "This will be your domain as my operations officer. Ready for adventure?" she asked, her eyes gleaming. "Absolutely, Captain," I replied. With a laugh, she informed me of our imminent launch in 15 days and assigned me daily briefings. "Welcome aboard, Commander," she said, shaking my hand before departing. As I admired the ship, I couldn't help but smile at the sight of the USS Enterprise emblazoned on its side.
Husband caught his wife cheating, plotted ultimate revenge, and delivered a deadly surprise to her affair partner. The sky held a deep darkness, visibility non-existent. Upon receiving the signal, 2 subdued shots were fired, causing 2 guards to collapse. Shots continued for the next 15 minutes. Once everything fell silent, the radio echoed. The building cleared, ready for evacuation. 14 years later, I found myself by the hotel room window, gazing at the sunset, reminiscing about how it all began and reflecting on how I ended up here. Sipping my vodka, the liquid burned as I swallowed, mirroring the memories of the past several weeks. Nevertheless, I held on to the hope that all was not lost. You see, 6 weeks ago, I stumbled upon the discovery that my wife of the past 12 years was having an affair. The revelation occurred by accident, but isn't that how most clueless husbands find out? By the way, I'm Logan. Jamie and I met during our junior year in college, dated until graduation. I joined the Marine Corps, and she embarked on a job search. Back then, I loved her, but didn't want her to marry me while I was stationed in who knows where. It seemed unfair to her. So, 5 years later, after completing my Marine service, I returned home and, within a few weeks, secured a good job with a large company in their sales group. It turned out my boss was also a Marine and had a preference for hiring former military types due to our disciplined work ethic. I excelled in my job, making a name for myself. During this period, I decided to re-enter the dating scene, exploring online sites. To my pleasant surprise, I found my college sweetheart Jamie on one of them. God, she looked good in those pictures. Now, Jamie may not have supermodel looks, but she possesses a body. In college, she pursued modern dance, prioritizing staying in shape, and what a shape she has. Standing at 5 feet 6 inches with legs reminiscent of a dancer, she is not overly muscular but curvy, boasting an amazing figure. Her long, flowing, rich brown hair frames her face, accompanied by those dark brown eyes and a smile that melts my heart every time I see it. She exudes that girl-next-door look, sweet and innocent, with just enough sexiness thrown in for good measure. I signed up as quickly as possible and contacted her immediately. It wasn't until a week later that she responded, questioning where the hell I had been and why I hadn't called or emailed her over the last 5 years. If she was this upset at me for not contacting her during my Marine service, then she must have missed me. This was a very positive sign. Soon we were dating and essentially picking up where we had left off in college. Within a year, we were married, and a year later, we welcomed our first child, Rebecca. My job was progressing well, even though I found myself traveling more, which was anticipated. 2 years later, our second daughter, Amy, came into the picture. Since then, I've been promoted, and we now reside in a lovely house in a good neighborhood with excellent schools. While I still travel quite a bit, sometimes for 2 weeks each month, it's a necessity for my job. It wasn't until a few years later that Jamie began questioning when I would reduce my travel. She missed my presence and felt safer when I was home. I explained that it was a necessary part of my job, assuring her that it wouldn't be much longer before I would be promoted to the next level, reducing my travel significantly and allowing me to be home more often. She reluctantly accepted this, but wasn't thrilled to see me go on my next trip. Looking back, I should have realized there was trouble brewing, but I fully loved and trusted my wife, making me blind to the initial signs of a problem. The first clue was our arguments over trivial matters. Upon my return home, she would blame me for things unrelated to me. If you were home more, this wouldn't happen, or we need you here, not gallivanting all over the country. She had a valid point, though it took me a while to realize it. The second clue surfaced when I found some of her new lingerie in the laundry. While searching for a shirt, I came across silk underwear and a matching silk top. My wife typically has simple tastes, opting for a t-shirt and shorts or sweatpants for bedtime. The only time I bought her something from Victoria's Secret, she wore it just once and never again. However, the lingerie I found was unfamiliar, and I assumed she bought it for herself. The third clue was the decline in our bed activity. Our once passionate and romantic encounters dwindled, with her offering various excuses, exhausted or not in the mood. It didn't initially seem problematic, and I believed things would return to normal once my travel reduced. I refrained from pushing her, aware that pressing the issue would worsen an already challenging situation. The final blow was devastating when first revealed, and I was hesitant to accept it. A mutual friend saw Jamie with someone at a farmer's market 40 miles away from our home. Initially thinking it was me, he observed them holding hands, laughing, touching, and kissing. When he approached, he realized it wasn't me. Sensing something amiss, he discreetly walked away, following them for a while until they drove off in a car. I still remember that call. My cell buzzed as I was leaving a meeting. Frank called me and informed me that he had something important to discuss. I told him I was in between meetings and couldn't talk, suggesting we could talk later. Frank agreed and asked me to call him at the earliest opportunity, expressing some concern in his voice. I assured him that I would and asked if the matter was urgent, to which he replied that it could wait. I hung up, not dwelling on the call, assuming Frank would have informed me if it were urgent. Later that evening, I returned Frank's call. I inquired about the reason for his call and what was so important. Frank hesitated before revealing that he had seen my wife out with another man earlier that day. I asked if she was with a friend, feeling a sense of nervousness. Frank struggled to convey the difficult news, stating that they appeared to be a couple, holding hands, laughing, and kissing. He apologized for being the bearer of such news and suggested that my wife might be having an affair. Those words hit me so hard that I was left feeling numb. What made him think that? We were happily married, and she had no reason to. I couldn't complete the thought. Clues I had noticed earlier suddenly made sense, yet I resisted believing it. Frank brought me back, expressing that he knew it was hard, but I needed to be aware. He suggested there might still be hope to save my marriage, and offered his support, telling me to let him know if I needed anything. I acknowledged and thanked him before hanging up, sitting on the bed and grappling with the reality, or potential cruel joke. As I pondered, anger intensified at the thought of my wife cheating. During the flight home, I began to cool down and think more clearly about what needed to be done. Without solid evidence, I didn't know where to start. Upon landing, my first call was to Frank, seeking details about the man she was with. Protecting my daughters from our issues was crucial. I wanted to salvage our marriage. Frank advised me not to do anything I would regret and shared that he had a friend who went through a similar situation. He suggested I talk to him for insight on handling the situation, emphasizing the importance of avoiding trouble or making things worse. Frank's advice resonated, and I realized I needed guidance from someone who had faced a similar situation. Right now, the best course of action is to head home and act like everything is normal. If she suspects you're onto something, it'll be tougher to gather evidence against her. I hope I'm mistaken, but I'm certain about what I witnessed that day. Frank was correct. Upon reaching home, I managed to compose myself enough to behave normally around Jamie and the girls. It wasn't a walk in the park, but I somehow pulled it off. In the following days, I searched the house for any clues of her affair, but nothing stood out. Yet, a nagging feeling persisted that I might be overlooking something. Frank called, suggesting I talk to his friend. I agreed to meet them at a bar across town the next day after work, keeping it from Jamie by mentioning late meetings. In the dive bar, I found Frank and his friend Mark in a back booth, nursing beers. Frank looked up as I sat down. Mark greeted me as the friend Frank had mentioned. We exchanged greetings, though neither seemed thrilled to be there. Mark spoke, having been briefed by Frank on my situation. He empathized with my feelings but warned against making the same mistakes he did, sharing his painful experience of revenge. It led to a 5-year prison term and losing everything in the divorce and lawsuit against his wife and her boss. He cautioned me against doing anything foolish, his gaze intense. I simply nodded, curious about alternative approaches. I inquired about what he would have done differently. Mark admitted he'd still go after the boss, but in a subtler manner to catch him off guard. He expressed deep contempt for the man who stole his wife. As for his wife, knowing what he knows now, he'd have opted for a divorce. Our conversation then delved into the do's and don'ts of my situation. The initial step was to secure damning evidence of my wife's infidelity to prevent any denial when confronting her. The second step involved consulting a divorce lawyer to understand how to protect assets and determine my rights in this situation. The third was to keep a substantial amount of cash on hand in case she discovered my actions and froze accounts and credit cards. Lastly, securing a small apartment or alternative living arrangements was crucial in case I decided to leave, ensuring I had a place to stay. While these suggestions were sound, I initially believed I could resolve the issue through conversation. However, as soon as I mentioned this, Mark pounded his fist on the table. Mark emphasized the importance of not doing anything stupid, pointing out that her new boyfriend might be filling her head with tales. He suggested that before approaching my wife, I needed to understand what she had been told and what she believed. Mark drew parallels to my military background as a Marine, highlighting the significance of good intel in battle. He stressed the need for a plan of attack and a strategy for when things go sideways, emphasizing the importance of knowing which way is forward. His question about my military service caught me off guard, and I confirmed that I was a Marine. I questioned the relevance, and Mark continued to stress the importance of having a plan and strategy, drawing connections to my current situation. I sighed, struggling to accept the possibility of my seemingly happy marriage coming to this. Mark apologized quietly, and we sat in silence until Frank broke it, asking about my plan and how I wanted to handle the situation. Realizing the necessity, I expressed my desire to salvage my marriage if possible, but more than anything, I wanted the other man to suffer without risking my own freedom. I made it clear that obtaining proof and intel on my adversary was a priority. Mark smiled at my last comment. He advised against hiring a private investigator, citing his own costly and unproductive experience. With access to her bank, credit card accounts, and phone records, he suggested checking for unusual purchases or calls. Additionally, exploring the possibility of a second cell phone and setting up hidden video cameras around the house for both visual and audio recording. Despite the discomfort, I agreed, determined to make him pay. Our conversation continued for another hour, during which I mentally noted the suggestions offered. Mark's advice emphasized the importance of not discussing the situation at work until I identified my wife's potential lover, considering the risk that someone familiar with my schedule might catch on. He also mentioned he would have approached his wife's lover more subtly, sparking my determination to devise a plan to outsmart this person. However, I needed more information and assistance. The next workday, I scrutinized my upcoming travel plans for the next month, discovering a 2-day trip. Concerned about someone at work knowing my schedule, I discreetly spoke with my boss, suggesting I might extend the client visit to a whole week. He approved the idea without hesitation. The subsequent step involved creating the illusion of being away while secretly returning. Using a prepaid debit card with cash, I purchased a return ticket on another airline. Online, I acquired several spy cameras and a regular camera with a powerful zoom and good low-light capabilities. This constituted the first part of my plan to uncover the identity of this person. The second part aimed to capture them in the act on video, eliminating any doubt of her infidelity. My day was dedicated to meticulous plotting and planning, a skill at which I excel. However, the crucial missing piece of information was the identity of the man involved. Until that was resolved, I couldn't trust anyone, not even my best friend and boss, Hal. Recognizing it would take time to unveil this person's name, I remained determined. By week's end, all the ordered items had been delivered to Frank's home. Now, I just needed the opportunity to discreetly install the spy cameras around my house. With Jamie's Saturday shopping routine with her girls and mother, the house would be empty. After several hours, all the cameras were in place and tested. I could even monitor them in real time from my tablet or laptop over the internet and observe what was happening. With the cameras installed, I proceeded to search the house for clues. Initially, I checked the credit card bills for any unusual charges, followed by an inspection of her closets to see if she had purchased any new, more revealing or shapely clothes. While my search didn't yield concrete evidence, I came across a few newer items, including a very short red dress I had never seen her wear before. The idea of her wearing it for anyone but me troubled me. Despite the lack of definitive proof, the red dress represented a departure from her usual attire, driving me to the point of needing time to think. I opted for a 5-mile jog in my running shorts and shoes, a long run that typically calmed my mind and provided clarity. Upon my return, as I arrived home, spotting Jamie's car in the driveway, I knew my daughters, whom I affectionately called my angels, were home. Their voices and laughter as I walked in never failed to bring a smile to my face. Calling out to Jamie, I was joyfully greeted by my girls, running from the family room to share their day. Jamie emerged from the kitchen, inquiring about my run and kissing me on the cheek before shooing the girls away. After dinner preparations, consisting of pork chops, I enjoyed a shower and our evening meal, followed by putting our girls to bed. In the family room, we watched TV, though my preoccupation with thoughts of Jamie's actions during my trips rendered me oblivious to the screen. Feeling overwhelmed, I announced an early bedtime, retreating to our bedroom. In the bedroom, noticing Jamie's purse on the hope chest, I took a chance and searched for clues. To my dismay, I discovered a cheap cell phone, previously unknown to me. Turning it on, I recorded the number and reviewed the call log, finding only one unfamiliar number, which I also noted before powering off the phone. This newfound evidence compelled me to finally accept the fact that she was having an affair. Heartbroken and consumed with a desire for revenge, I remembered Mark's advice not to act impulsively and resolved to be patient. Quickly changing, I went to bed, pretending to be asleep when Jamie eventually joined me, avoiding conversation to prevent unintentional revelations. The next few days were challenging, attempting to maintain a semblance of normalcy after uncovering damning proof. As the morning of another business trip approached, I went through my usual routine, packing my bags into the car. Just before heading out, I casually asked Jamie if she had anything special planned during my absence, receiving a strange look as she mentioned the usual routine. Racing through possible explanations in my mind, I bid a quick goodbye and drove to the airport, wondering if the cameras in our house would capture her with the person involved. Despite hoping for her decency to refrain from bringing him into our bed, I became increasingly certain that before all this, she would never have cheated on me. In the following days, concluding my work with the particular client in record time, I packed up, preparing to return home. That evening, I monitored the video feeds from the cameras but found nothing unusual. Consequently, I opted to review earlier recordings. The system initiated recording when someone entered the camera-equipped room, storing all footage centrally, accessible remotely. As I fast-forwarded through that day's recordings, I discovered a moment when Jamie was on her secret cell phone. I stopped and reversed the video to observe her answering the phone, then played it at normal speed. The audio quality was poor, but I heard enough. She was speaking to someone, referring to them as baby. They discussed my absence for the week and the logistics of meeting discreetly at a motel. Despite my urge to hear the rest, she laughed and turned her back to the camera, making it impossible for me to catch the entire conversation. When she turned back, she continued instructing the person to park down the street at a coffee shop a few blocks away. "Okay, baby, I can't wait. I'll see you tomorrow night." I couldn't believe what I just heard. He was going to be in my house and our bed. Thoughts of disposing of his body crossed my mind, but Mark's warning echoed, urging me not to do anything rash. Suppressing my anger, I resolved to wait for the right moment, though the strain was becoming unbearable. My wife, the love of my life, and the mother of our 2 children, was betraying me. Why was she doing this? What had driven her into the arms of another man? The flight back home was too quick. I wasn't ready for what awaited me, so I checked into a hotel, contemplating my next move. I knew tonight was the night he was coming to my house, and I wanted to see him with my own eyes. Was he someone I knew or someone from work? That much I needed to know to help me decide how to proceed. With no idea of what time he'd arrive, I knew he was going to park at the coffee shop down the street, so I waited there, even though I had no idea what he looked like. To be safe, I rented a car at the airport. Finding a spot with a good view of the parking lot, I brought my camera, checking the zoom quality. I could be at least 100 yards away and get a close-up view of his face and license plate. Around 9 p.m., a silver BMW M3 pulled into the parking lot. I began taking pictures, and thankfully, the lighting was good, giving me a clear view of his face. It was no one I recognized. He parked on the other side of the lot, away from the coffee shop, then started walking towards my house. I took a deep breath to control my rage. While sitting there, I accessed the Wi-Fi from the coffee shop, viewing the cameras in my house. After several minutes, I saw him enter and passionately kiss my wife. Suppressing my fury, I listened to their conversation. He expressed his thoughts about her all day, and they discussed having the house to themselves until the next morning, since she had sent the kids over to her parents for the night and I wouldn't be back until Friday. How considerate that she sent the kids away. I observed as he started undressing my wife right in our living room. She reciprocated, and in just a few short minutes they were undressed, with their hands all over each other. She suggested taking it up to the bedroom, and they both ran out of sight of the camera towards the stairs. As I listened to their laughter, leaving their clothes spread around the floor, I realized I needed to act. Lucky for me, I got out of my car and walked quickly down to my house. The front door was left unlocked as they hurried upstairs, making things easier for me. I went straight for his pants, discovering his wallet with all the needed information and a little extra. With his wallet in hand, I headed to my home office on the first floor, opposite our bedroom, minimizing the risk of being heard. Switching on my computer and the printer scanner, I waited for them to power up. Once ready, I began scanning items from Stephen Bannister's wallet, copying his driver's license and other details. After returning the wallet, I took pictures of their scattered clothes and started recording what I was witnessing with the camera's video feature. Quietly ascending the stairs as I reached the top, faint sounds of their lovemaking reached me, turning my stomach. The bedroom door was wide open and they believed they had the house to themselves. Slowly, I made my way toward the bedroom. With their voices getting louder, I found myself in the doorway, observing Steve on his back, undressed, with my wife on top, in the classic 69 position, pleasing each other. They were so engrossed that I managed a few steps into the room, unnoticed. Aware that the hidden cameras didn't offer the best definition, I desired high-definition footage. I recorded several minutes before resisting the urge to grab a baseball bat and attack him. Mark's wise words echoed in my mind, "Don't do anything stupid." So I backed out slowly and left the house, driving back to the hotel. My mind was a mess, and the hate I felt was at an all-time high. I couldn't remember being this mad, and it was starting to scare me. I called Frank, sharing what I had done and the information obtained. Frank acknowledged my actions but expressed concern about the risk of being in the house again. He apologized for the situation and offered any help he could provide. I thanked him and mentioned my need to talk with someone and my intention to ask Mark for a favor. Frank agreed to arrange a meeting with Mark over the weekend, as Mark had expressed a willingness to help. After the conversation with Frank, I attempted to sleep without success. I decided to clear my mind and work off the rage with my usual morning run. However, it did little to ease my emotions. Following the run, I took a shower and then a long nap to cope with the lack of sleep from the previous night. Returning the rental car to the airport, I picked up my own car and headed straight to the office to check in and talk with Hal. I needed to reduce my work-related travel, and upon entering Hal's office, I closed the door and informed him about my situation. I mentioned my wife's desire for me to be home more and expressed the need for changes in my travel schedule. I looked at Hal, awaiting his response. Hal informed me that my promotion had been approved, and I wouldn't have to travel as frequently anymore. It was a welcomed relief, although I couldn't fully grasp it at the moment. My mind was consumed by the knowledge of my wife's affair. Hal noticed my distraction and expressed concern about my recent behavior. I felt compelled to confide in him about what I had discovered. I told him about catching my wife with her lover and recording them together. Hal reacted with shock and sympathy, offering his support. I explained that I needed to be home more to salvage my marriage, and I asked him to keep the situation confidential, fearing someone in the office might be involved in leaking information about my schedule. Hal agreed to cover for me if I needed time off to gather evidence against my wife. I expressed my desire to confront her with undeniable proof, to either salvage the marriage or protect myself in a divorce. Hal nodded in agreement, promising his assistance and discretion. After thanking Hal, I left his office, feeling a bit relieved that things were falling into place, even though deep down I knew my marriage was beyond repair. I went home that night and tried my best to act normal. My girls attacked me as I walked through the door, and I had to keep from crying, thinking how they would be affected if a divorce were to happen. I didn't like the idea of having to get permission to visit my own children. I have to get custody of my kids. On Saturday, while my wife and kids were out shopping, I met with Mark and Frank at a diner. I updated them on the progress I'd made in gathering information. Mark remarked on my courage and expressed surprise that I hadn't taken more drastic action. He then asked how he could assist me, mentioning Frank's mention of my time spent in prison. Both Frank and Mark regarded me with curiosity. For the next hour, I explained my plan and outlined what I hoped to achieve with Mark's connections. When I finished, Mark smiled and expressed admiration for the plan. He mentioned knowing someone who could potentially assist me and suggested they might be able to recommend others, though he cautioned that they would likely expect payment. Mark agreed to make some calls to his contacts. I handed him my cell number and asked him to contact me once he had spoken with his friends so we could arrange a meeting to finalize the details. After discussing a few more ideas, I planned to implement them as soon as possible. I realized I needed to make some additional online purchases to prepare for the next phase of my plan. The rest of the weekend went the way most weekends go, with one noticeable difference. Sunday night, my wife and I usually make love. That night, this time, she wasn't feeling well. It wasn't the first time this happened, so it was not surprising, but it had been over a month since the last time we were close. My next trip was coming up, and I asked Hal for the following week off, but if anyone called the office, they were to be told I was on a normal business trip. He had no problem with that and wished me luck. So now I had to let my wife know my next trip was going to be longer. She was not happy, but that was to be expected. I reassured my wife that my frequent traveling would soon come to an end and that I would be home more often. Trying to lighten the mood, I joked that I would be around so much she'd get tired of me. However, she didn't respond with a smile. Instead, she sighed and told me to call her when I arrived at my destination. Her demeanor was distant, and I couldn't shake the feeling that our marriage was coming to an end. I rushed out the door before I said something I'd regret and drove to the airport again. The meetings with these clients went very well, and a deal was reached early, so I was able to fly back a day sooner. I kept checking the cameras during the week, but he didn't reappear at my house. But I did see her on that secret cell phone of hers, so I listened to her conversation, and I knew this was the opportunity I was looking for, even though it shocked me to hear what she was planning on doing. I went to the office and found the items that I had ordered waiting for me. Knowing my wife's normal routine, I could easily set up one of these items that I got with little chance of being caught. She went to the gym 4 times a week, and I knew where and when. So, I had her spare car keys and was able to place the item where she wouldn't find it. Next, I went to Steven's condo to see if he was there. I saw his car parked in the carport, so I assumed he was home. I brought my camera and was checking if I could see him inside. I got very lucky as I saw him through his sliding doors, and that he wasn't alone. He was with another woman, and they seemed to be romantically connected, as they were kissing and touching each other like a loving couple. This was too good to be true, as I took a video of their affection for each other. When I saw them leaving together, I followed it at a safe distance. They went for lunch, and this gave me a chance to place the other item on his car. This was a little more difficult and dangerous if someone saw me, but I was able to do it without being caught. Now all I needed to do was wait. That was the hardest thing for me to do. I received a call from Mark, who informed me that he had a friend who could assist with my plan. We decided to meet in my hotel room to avoid being seen together in public, considering the nature of the activities we were planning. When they arrived, Mark introduced me to Joe, a computer hacker who could help with our scheme. Over the next hour, I recounted the details of my wife's affair and expressed my desire for revenge against her lover. I showed them copies of the contents of the man's wallet that I had obtained. Joe raised concerns about the legality of our plan and demanded to know what was in it for him. After considering for a moment, I offered Joe $5,000 in cash. He agreed to the terms, but insisted on receiving half of the payment up front and the remainder upon completion of the job. We discussed the need to gain access to the man's condo to access his computer and gather additional evidence against my wife. With the intel I had on Stephen, Joe used my laptop to review his recent purchases. What stood out were the 2 airline tickets to Las Vegas and a hotel reservation for 5 nights. This signaled our decision to break into his condo, prompting Joe to ask if I knew whether there was an alarm system. I admitted uncertainty, so Joe agreed to investigate and get back to me. If an alarm system was present, he insisted on an increased payment for facilitating our entry. I agreed to pay him more, contingent on justification. It appeared my wife was planning a final trip with this individual. I checked my tablet to confirm the functionality of the tracking devices I had placed in their cars, accessible via my tablet or smartphone to monitor their locations. Additionally, I examined home video cameras, confirming she had packed a small carry-on bag for the trip. The day arrived, and I monitored their progress from my hotel room. I called Joe, and he agreed to meet later that afternoon. While he hadn't identified any visible alarm systems, he emphasized the need for caution. We met a few blocks from Stephen's condo and discussed the plan for gaining entry. Joe, drawing on his prison experience, possessed the skill of lockpicking. It was just after sunset, and the growing darkness would help maintain discretion. Joe, with his laptop in a messenger bag, and I, with my camera, arrived at the front door of Stephen's condo. Joe immediately knelt down and worked on the locks. After almost a minute, the door was open, and we entered, first checking for any signs of an alarm system. Satisfied that none existed, we proceeded to locate Stephen's computer. Fortunately, it was openly accessible, allowing Joe to carry out his tasks. I interrupted, saying, "Wait," as I slowly recorded a video of the room's layout. "I want to ensure we leave everything as we found it." Joe nodded in agreement, acknowledging the importance of leaving no traces behind. He resumed his work as I explored for potential incriminating evidence, browsing through his mail, including bank statements and credit card bills. I ventured into his bedroom, capturing video footage. The remarkable cleanliness and high-end furniture suggested affluence, leaving me still uncertain about his profession. Joe's exclamation of "pay dirt" brought me back to the living room. He had successfully accessed Stephen's online bill payments, discovering checks and extra credit cards. I was pleased, having brought a card reader to record information from the magnetic strip. Joe proposed making copies for online purchases, potentially maxing out his cards in a few hours. Joe grinned and inquired if it was possible to empty out the man's bank account. I confirmed that it could be done, intending to carry out the transaction from the man's computer to make it seem legitimate. Joe mentioned the possibility of the bank calling to verify the transaction, but assured me that no password was necessary, as I had already copied the man's social security number from his wallet. I chuckled at the man's carelessness and gave Joe the go-ahead to proceed. Expressing my desire to inflict maximum damage on the man, I suggested emptying his bank account immediately and sabotaging his credit cards on the day of his return from Las Vegas. Joe enthusiastically agreed, referring to it as a fitting homecoming gift. He emphasized the importance of covering our tracks to avoid any repercussions. I reassured him that we were taking precautions to avoid detection, pointing out the latex gloves we were wearing as evidence of our caution. I went back to search through his bedroom and didn't find much until I looked in the back of his closet. I found a shoebox with several recordable DVR discs. They were labeled with the names of women. As I pulled out the box, I dumped it on his bed and started to sort through them. I didn't recognize any of the names until I saw Jamie. That idiot had recorded the 2 of them together, but why? Joe called me over to the other room to show me something he had found. He explained that the man we were targeting was involved in blackmail, possessing numerous videos of women with Stephen. These videos showed the women's faces clearly, but Stephen's face wasn't always visible due to the camera angles. Some emails indicated that the women were being extorted for money, with threats of using the videos against them in court. Joe speculated that Stephen preyed on married women with children, exploiting their vulnerabilities for his gain. Seeking retaliation, I asked Joe if Stephen kept all the videos on his hard drive. Joe replied that he wasn't certain, but suggested that the DVDs found in the closet might contain the only copies. I decided to gather the DVDs and search for a backup drive, but couldn't find one. Returning to Joe, I learned that he had located the backup drive. After instructing Joe to do a full backup and wipe the laptop's drive, I explained our plan to bankrupt Stephen by ruining his blackmail scheme. I also expressed my desire to inform the women involved that they were no longer under threat. I asked Joe to print out all relevant emails so I could set up an email account to communicate with them. He offered to set up the account from Stephen's computer, and I agreed to the idea. After wrapping things up, I did one last sweep of the place before we locked up and departed swiftly. Back at the cars, I gave Joe an envelope containing the remainder of his payment expressing my gratitude for his assistance. We shook hands, and he assured me he'd be ready to carry out the next phase of our plan when needed. With that, he drove off, and I returned to my hotel to continue implementing my scheme. I called my in-laws to check on my children. My father-in-law answered, and I greeted him cheerfully, inquiring about the kids and expressing my hope that they weren't causing any trouble. He reassured me that the children were behaving well and mentioned Jamie's weekend trip with her friends. I feigned ignorance and said I hadn't spoken with her, yet emphasizing that I wanted to ensure the kids were settled before contacting her. After our conversation, it was evident that Jamie's father had no knowledge of her affair in Las Vegas. It further solidified my disdain for her actions. My next call was to the house, which I knew she wouldn't be at, so I left a message. Then I waited an hour, and when she didn't call me back, I called her cell again. She didn't pick up, so I left a message saying I was worried, that I had called the house and she didn't answer or call me back, and now she wasn't answering her cell. Please call me, just so I know you're okay. I also added that if I didn't hear from her within the hour, I was going to call her parents. 15 minutes later, I received a surprise call from Jamie. She asked if everything was all right, mentioning that she had tried calling the house but received no answer. I assured her that everything was fine, explaining that I had taken the girls to my parents' house after spending time with friends. Jamie's response sounded somewhat tense. I suggested we have a night out together once I returned home in a week, but her response seemed uncertain. Feeling suspicious, I pressed Jamie, teasing her and attempting to make her nervous. She claimed to be tired and hinted at wanting to end the conversation. Respecting her wishes, I bid her good night and expressed my love before ending the call. Despite my efforts to remain calm, anger began to resurface within me. I didn't sleep well, so I was up early doing my morning run. I got back to my hotel room and took a nice long shower. Afterward, I called the office and checked if anything needed my attention, but all seemed to be going smoothly there. Then I got the call every parent fears. Rebecca was injured at school and had to be taken to the hospital. At that moment, nothing mattered to me more than the safety of my child. The school had called my house first. When no one answered, they tried calling me at work, which in turn led to someone from my office calling me. I called the school back, and they informed me she had broken her arm and was at the emergency room being treated. I rushed out the door and went straight to the hospital. Once there, I called Jamie's cell, and when I got her voicemail, I screamed into the phone that if she didn't call me within the next 15 minutes, the next call I made would be to a divorce lawyer. It was an hour later when my cell rang. I saw it was from Jamie. I rejected the call and sat with my daughter as the doctor set her arm in a cast. She was crying, saying she wanted mommy. I wanted to comfort her, but I didn't know what to say. It took some time, but she finally settled down and I took her to her grandparents. My phone rang again and again. I rejected it. When I had calmed down, I made a call to a good divorce lawyer and set up an appointment for the following day. Then Jamie called again. I took this call. She greeted me, sarcastically commenting on my supposed luck at the blackjack tables, and informed me that she had contacted a divorce lawyer. Through tears, she threatened to use the video she had of me and Stephen together as evidence to gain full custody of our children. I reminded her of her absence when our child was in the hospital crying for her mother while she was with her lover in Las Vegas. Attempting to reassure her, I suggested that she could start a new life with Stephen and potentially have more children. She insisted that it was me she loved and wanted. Feeling conflicted, I ended the call, unable to bear the emotional turmoil. I took Rebecca and Amy home, helped them pack their bags with some clothes, and brought them to my hotel, getting them their own room next to mine. Then I called Jamie's father and told him what happened at school, and that for the time being, we wouldn't be living at home until some things could be resolved. My father-in-law called and asked about the situation between Jamie and me. I explained that we were having some problems, but suggested he speak with Jamie for more details. He informed me that he would be taking care of the girls for the time being until he was sure of their well-being and safety. Although he didn't fully understand, he wished us the best and hoped we could resolve our issues. I then contacted my lawyer and instructed him to proceed with serving my wife. Next, I called Mark and instructed him to wreak havoc on Stephen by maxing out his credit cards, emptying his bank accounts, and damaging his credit. Later that night, Jamie called me in distress. Initially hesitant to answer, I eventually did after receiving a text from her. She tearfully explained that Stephen was blackmailing her, threatening to share videos of them from Vegas with others. I responded coldly, suggesting that she had brought this upon herself by engaging in the affair. I hung up, knowing that Jamie needed to face the consequences of her actions. She had chosen to leave her home and marriage for her own pleasure, and now she would have to face the repercussions. After deciding to end things with Jamie, I needed to address her lover, Stephen. I called Mark and informed him that I had contacted my lawyer to have Jamie served with divorce papers, which would take a few days. Meanwhile, I wanted to move my money offshore, ensuring that only my funds were protected. Mark questioned my decision, but I assured him that I was done with Jamie and was determined to give her what she deserved. Mark mentioned a change in plans and suggested meeting at 5. We convened at a dive bar and engaged in a lengthy conversation that lasted almost 2 hours. Before parting ways, we shook hands, and I handed him a substantial envelope. For the next 3 days, Jamie kept calling, and I kept ignoring. I wanted her to suffer. Friday evening, I got the call I was eagerly waiting for. It was a video call. I answered. On the other end, there was a man tied to a chair and all bloodied. A voice in the background informed Stephen that his friend had a message for him. Stephen, looking at the screen, was addressed by someone who mentioned his recent trip to Tijuana and the exhaustion that must come with it. The speaker hinted at Stephen's financial troubles and suggested that his current situation would help him hide from the bank. The speaker continued, mentioning someone named Santiago and his special stew, hinting at a sinister implication. They explained that they could have pursued legal action against Stephen for alienation of affection but opted not to waste their time. The message concluded with a farewell to Stephen, indicating that someone named Mr. Lopez was now involved. I saw Stephen for the last time that day. In his eyes, I saw fear. That is what I call a good investment. Stephen was still alive when he was lowered into the giant blue drum filled with Santiago's special mix. No one ever heard from him again. No one even asked about him. 7 months later, I was a free man. I got custody of my daughters. I get to keep the house until both my daughters are grown, and then we can sell and split the difference. There was no alimony or child support. I wanted nothing to do with Jamie, but she has visitation rights, and I usually drop the daughters at her place and drive away. A year later, I started dating Lisa. She was previously Amy's school teacher, and it seems that Amy likes her company more than her mother. I have not decided on getting married, and I'm taking this slowly.
The entire episode kicked off when I ventured into an unfamiliar place. Having dropped off one of our more bothersome clients at the airport, enduring a morning filled with his complaints, I felt no rush to return to the office. Given the dreary Tuesday and the prospect of an afternoon reviewing contracts, I decided to stop at a drab-looking bar restaurant about a mile from the airport. The plan was to enjoy a leisurely lunch and a beer or two before heading back to work in the salt mines. Seated in a booth, savoring my beer and contemplating the challenge of finding a decent burger in this world, my attention was captured by a couple entering the restaurant. Observing as they settled into a booth across the room, sitting side by side, I couldn't help but notice the woman, a shapely blonde in a short skirt showcasing her attractive legs, paired with a tight pink short-sleeve top. Her companion seemed like a thug wannabe, struggling to pull off the look in skinny jeans and a black leather jacket. My heightened interest in this seemingly happy couple becomes clear when I reveal that the woman was Shelley, my sister-in-law, and the guy with her was undoubtedly not her husband, my brother Dave. Worse still, it was evident they were more than casual acquaintances. They placed their drink orders with the waitress and immediately engaged in unrestrained displays of affection, necking in the booth. Shocked, I watched as the guy slid his hand up her thigh under the short skirt. Shelley broke their kiss, letting her head fall back against the booth, sighing. The question wasn't whether I would address this situation. That was a given. The real dilemma was whether I could restrain myself from confronting them violently right there in the restaurant. I had never been fond of Shelley, disliking her from the time my brother started dating her. My pessimism persisted when he fell head over heels in love with her and announced their marriage just 4 months into the relationship. Dave, at 23, seemed unaware of what he was getting into. However, there was simply no way to convey to him that Shelley was everything to him. To me, she was a pretty, cheerful, somewhat shallow and selfish girl, not nearly as smart or interesting as Dave himself. They both seemed to adore the same person, Shelley. He would do anything for her, and that's exactly what she liked. To my pleasant surprise, the first 3 years of their marriage appeared to be very happy. However, the scene unfolding 30 feet from me suggested that the happy days were over. The guy she was with now had his hand on Shelley's waist, kissing her neck as he worked her over. With her eyes closed, She didn't see me approach and was startled when I sat down across the table from them, casually greeting Shelley. The comical moment unfolded as her eyes popped open and her boyfriend pulled his hands off her, turning to look at me. Her face went from momentarily startled to stunned and then truly shocked. Her jaw dropped and she froze, staring blankly at me. His face held the same startled look momentarily before turning annoyed. Before he could speak, I continued in a cordial manner, inquiring about how she'd been and asking about Dave. Turning to him and extending my hand, I introduced myself as Will, Shelley's brother-in-law, emphasizing the connection to her husband, Dave. His eyes widened, and he sat frozen. Ignoring my hand, Shelley began to recover herself, babbling about Robbie being an old friend. With a friendly smile, I casually remarked on the relationship situation they were caught in, leaving Shelley gasping and hoping I hadn't witnessed their activities. Robbie abruptly stood up and muttered that he had to leave. Without even a glance back at Shelley, he walked swiftly out of the restaurant. Later, I casually remarked to Shelley that Robbie seemed like a nice guy and questioned why he left so suddenly. Internally, I seethed with rage at the treatment my brother Dave was receiving from this woman. Expressing my frustration, I kept my voice down, but made it clear that Dave adored Shelley, doing everything for her. However, it wasn't enough for her, as she engaged in illicit activities with a questionable individual sporting greasy hair and a poorly executed Matt Dillon mustache. Shelley looked terrified, her face turning pale. In response to my accusations, she stammered, trying to explain, but her voice trailed off without a conclusion. After observing her for a minute, I unleashed my anger, expressing disappointment at her actions. I questioned how long this had been going on and how many others she was involved with. Shelley pleaded, grabbing my hand desperately, and begged me not to tell Dave. Despite her pleas, I considered informing my brother about his wife's infidelity. I questioned whether he deserved to know the truth about the person he was married to. Shelley was either incredibly naive or too stunned to think clearly. I pulled my hand free, contemplating whether I should reveal the painful truth to Dave. Her eyes were wild, and she seemed to be thinking frantically. I sat back with a smile, curious about what she would offer to keep me silent. Shelley, after some contemplation, changed her expression. She pleaded with me not to tell Dave, promising to reveal the entire story. According to her, she claimed that another woman, someone I was involved with, was cheating on me. I laughed at the seemingly far-fetched revelation. Shelley looked at me steadily, insisting that she wasn't kidding. According to her, the other woman had been seeing a guy from the health club for at least a couple of weeks. This certainty unsettled me, even though I knew it to be impossible. We had been together for 7 happy years of marriage and a decade overall. She was devoted, sensible, kind, thoughtful, and the most honest person I knew. She loved me, and I was sure of it, just as sure as I was of my own love for her. Shelley leaned forward, sensing my confusion. She claimed to be telling the truth, mentioning that the other woman had confided in her about the affair the previous week. I scrutinized her face, trying to gather my thoughts. Despite her initial terror, Shelley appeared calm and in control, as if she were sharing a genuine revelation rather than spinning a wild and desperate tale. While I couldn't immediately dismiss what she was saying, it was challenging to believe given our history and her recent behavior. Seated at the dinner table, my gaze returned to Shelley, who seemed to be anticipating my next move. Although I didn't reveal it to her, concealing her infidelity from Dave was not an option. I needed to uncover the truth about him. I spoke slowly, suggesting that perhaps we could reach an agreement. After some contemplation, I expressed my unwillingness to let Anne deceive me. I proposed that if Shelley could help me gather information about Anne's actions, I wouldn't disclose what I had witnessed that afternoon to Dave. However, I laid down a condition. She had to swear not to see Robbie or any other man besides Dave. Relief washed over her face as she swore to comply. She asked, "Will you have my word on it?" I remained skeptical about the value of her word. Responding to her question, I inquired about what she would be willing to do to fulfill her part of the agreement. Expressing my desire to gather information about Anne's affair, I suggested a plan to Shelley. I proposed providing her with a tape recorder to conceal in her apartment. The idea was for her to invite Anne over, offer some wine, and engage in casual conversation, encouraging Anne to reveal details about her affair. I specified that I wanted to know the identity of the man, when and how the affair started, how often she had been with him, and the reasons behind her actions. As I spoke to Shelley, I realized that I was starting to believe her unusual story about Anne's infidelity, which infuriated me. Shelley nodded in agreement, stating that she could carry out the plan. She suggested softening Anne up by sharing the details of my own affair, making it feel like a genuine relationship conversation. Sarcastically, I questioned if Robbie was the only one who had been involved with her, or if there were others. She quickly denied any others, but I remained unconvinced. 20 minutes later, I was driving back to the office, contemplating somber thoughts about the potential end of Dave's marriage, and the looming possibility of the end of mine. My first instinct might have been to call Dave and inform him about what I had witnessed Shelley doing, but I recognized that it wasn't an option. I had always been the steady older brother, while Dave was the charming and outgoing one with a history of short-lived relationships due to his talkative nature. When Dave met Shelley, everything changed. Despite being a confident and charming individual, he became a lovesick schoolboy within a month or two. Shelley had completely captivated him, and he was determined to marry her. Dave idolized Shelley, considering her incapable of doing any wrong. Knowing Dave's unwavering devotion to Shelley, I refrained from speaking to him until I had concrete evidence. I realized that he wouldn't believe she was cheating unless he heard it directly from her. Despite my hopes that Shelley might be lying or mistaken about Anne's faithfulness to me, the likelihood diminished. The possibility that Shelley could have lied to me out of desperation crossed my mind, but I also considered the consequences of discovering it was all a fabrication. When I arrived at my office, I took out a pad and made notes on the steps I would have to take if the worst turned out to be true. This included considerations about credit cards, selling the house, transferring car titles, and more. I hoped that in a few days, I would be able to discard that sheet of paper. When I arrived home for dinner, cheerfully humming in the kitchen as she set the table, she greeted me with a big hug and a kiss, appearing as the loving wife I'd usually be happy to see at the end of the day. Despite my suspicions, cultivated over the past 7 years, I knew I had to play the innocent husband for a few more days. Underneath the surface, I felt a mix of fury and hurt, unsure of how to process my emotions. We chatted amicably during dinner, but when she mentioned her workout at the health club during dessert, I couldn't resist a bit of probing. I casually remarked to Shelley, commenting on her recent dedication to workouts. I asked if the club was now offering free ice cream. She laughed, though I noticed a slight flush on her face. She explained that she had been enjoying the positive feeling of a good, sweaty workout and coming home to her loving husband. She also mentioned that, a few weeks ago, the black slacks I liked were starting to feel tight, but now they fit perfectly. She beamed affectionately, and despite my concerns about her fidelity, I couldn't help but appreciate her beauty and my love for her. If she were truly cheating on me, I couldn't help but feel conflicted and unsure of how to navigate the situation. Despite what the court calendar officially stated, my marriage ended exactly 1 week later, on another Tuesday. Shelley and I had orchestrated everything. I provided her with a small tape recorder to hide in her living room, and she arranged for Anne to drop by for lunch on a Tuesday afternoon when Anne had a day off from work. Shelley, who didn't have a job, kept me on edge throughout that afternoon in my office, pretending to work, contemplating what the women were discussing and its potential impact on my life at 430. When Shelley called and informed me that they were done and Anne had left, my heart sank. Desperately hoping for a different outcome, I asked if Anne had talked to her about it. Shelley, sounding a little drunk, giggled affirmatively. She shared that she had told Anne about Robbie, and Anne, in turn, disclosed details about Marion, emphasizing that he was a really big fella. Feeling the tension, I realized I was squeezing the phone so tightly that my fingers ached. I agreed to drop by in 20 minutes. When I reached Shelley's place, she handed me the tape recorder at the door. Reminding me of the promise I made not to disclose anything, I assured her that he wouldn't hear a word from me. I emphasized the importance of ensuring that Anne never found out about the recording, as she might become furious and potentially tell Dave. Nodding in acknowledgement, I turned and left. That evening was one of the most painful of my life. Knowing I couldn't listen to the tape until Anne was asleep, I continued pretending to be the loving husband while she was still a little tipsy. She shared that she had spent the afternoon with Shelley and had consumed a lot of wine. Additionally, she was amorous. After clearing the dinner dishes, she pulled me towards the bedroom, asking if I had a little something for her tonight. In a flirtatious tone, I questioned whether I could or even wanted to go through with it. The thought crossed my mind that it might be the last time I would ever have closeness with Anne. Still hoping, against all reason, that she might not have been unfaithful, I followed her into the bedroom, and we had lovemaking. For me, it wasn't making love. My torn heart and worried mind overshadowed any pleasure. We rested for a while in each other's arms, then repeated the act a few minutes later. Anne was fast asleep, snoring gently on her side next to me. I retreated to the guest room, closed the door behind me, and listened to the tape. The first few minutes of conversation between Shelley and Anne were breezy and casual, with Shelley keeping the wine flowing. After a while, she confessed to Anne that she had something to share. She proceeded to share the details of her affair with the a-hole Robbie. It became evident that Anne was already aware of the affair, and Shelley was merely providing her with the juicy specifics to soften her up. Shelley executed her role admirably, even confessing with a laugh that Robbie was just the latest, not the best. There had been a guy named Ellis, but unfortunately, he had moved out of town. Anne giggled and pretended to be shocked, though she appeared to be enjoying the story. The explicit details of the sleazy narrative had little effect on me. I already knew what Shelley was, and the added specifics would only make it easier to convince Dave that she had indeed cheated on him. Anxiously awaiting the inevitable, I resisted the urge to fast-forward the tape. Eventually, Shelley redirected the conversation towards Andy, expressing curiosity about my story. She giggled, mentioning that all I had shared so far was meeting him at the health club and his well-endowed nature. My body tensed as I listened to Anne's voice on the recording, laughing and describing Andy as amazing, the largest she had ever encountered. She went on to share more details, expressing initial doubts about it fitting inside her, leading to laughter from both women. Overwhelmed by the revelations, I stopped the tape and leaned back in my chair, absorbing the painful truth. My marriage was now officially over. Did I even want to hear the rest? I considered letting my lawyer listen to it. After some thought, I switched the machine back on. It was time to face the entire story, confront the anger and pain, and begin the process of figuring out what the rest of my life would look like. Shelley inquired about the beginning of the affair, asking how it started. Anne responded, explaining that she never meant to cheat on me and felt terrible about it. She mentioned our happiness together and expressed her disbelief in engaging in infidelity. She attributed it to having a bad case of BDF, which she found amusing. Laughing, Anne heard Shelley ask about BDF, and she promised to explain after having more wine. Anne continued, sharing that she had been going to the health club for a couple of years to avoid getting saggy and to maintain my interest. A few months ago, she started noticing a new trainer named Marion, describing him as hot with broad shoulders and amazing muscles. She mentioned his flirtatious behavior with women and recalled witnessing him talking quietly with Patty McAllister, a former colleague. Anne watched Patty enter Marion's office, and later, in the locker room, Patty appeared well-drilled, exhibiting a dreamy-eyed look and a vague smile. I greeted Patty and noticed her happy demeanor. She shared that she had a bad case of BTF, explaining it as big tool fever. She giggled, ensuring no one could hear her, and recounted her experiences with Marion, emphasizing his sensational qualities as a lovemaking partner and the impressive size of his tool. Patty described how Marion had flirted with her, eventually convincing her to go into his office, leading to an ongoing carnal relationship at the club. She expressed that he was incredible, providing her with the craziest lovemaking she had ever experienced. While her revelations caught my attention, I had no initial plans to take any action, considering Patty's divorce status and her freedom to play with whomever she liked. Over the next couple of weeks, my curiosity about Marion grew. I responded more attentively when he flirted with me, such as brushing against me or touching my shoulder while assisting me with the machines. During one workout session, as I performed bench presses in a nearly empty area, he stood behind me as if to spot me. Looking up, I noticed his shorts right above my head, and the sizable bulge of his package caught my attention. I couldn't believe how big and thick it looked in his shorts. He smiled down at me, aware of what I was looking at. I almost dropped the bar on my chest, but managed to finish my reps. As I put the bar back on the rack, he took my hand off the bar and slid it gently down over his shorts. His tool felt as enormous as it looked, and it was hard as a rock. Then, after a couple of minutes, he gently pulled me to my feet, looked around to ensure no one was there, and led me by the hand into his office. I wasn't thinking, kind of dazed. He locked the door behind us, sat me down in a chair, and without a word, pulled off his shorts, standing in front of me. I swear I wasn't thinking at all. We had wild lovemaking. By the time he finished, I was beside myself, exhausted, and totally spent. Shelley reacted with an impressed, "Wow," and it seemed like she genuinely meant it. She assumed that Anne had continued seeing Marion. Anne explained that after the encounter in Marion's office, she had drifted into the shower, feeling dreamy and weak in the knees. Wiped out, she cleaned up and went home, overwhelmed by guilt and fear of being discovered by me. Surprisingly, I didn't suspect anything that night, and it seemed normal. Despite my desire for closeness, she made an excuse, fearing I might notice a change. The following night, she mentioned giving me the full treatment, engaging in closeness until I couldn't continue. Anne admitted staying away from the gym for 2 weeks following the incident. I just knew I couldn't be anywhere near Marion without being tempted again. Finally, I told myself it had been a one-time thing. I was a grown woman with a wonderful husband, and I could resist him. So I started going back. And the first couple of times it was fine. Marion winked at me and flirted a little, but he left me alone. And I thought, this is okay. I'm over this. And I relaxed my guard a little. Then about a week after that, he caught me again at the bench, and the room was empty. And he got my hand on his tool, and in no time, you were back in his office. Shelley finished her sentence, expressing how much better it was. Anne, speaking somewhat dreamily, struggled to describe the experience. She conveyed her deep love for closeness with me, emphasizing our satisfaction in each other. Anne confessed that she had never been tempted to fool around before, even with a flirtatious coworker named Alex. Despite his success with other girls, Anne had remained uninterested. However, with Marion, she felt as though she had never experienced such pleasure before. Giggling, Anne acknowledged the absurdity of sharing such details, emphasizing that there was nothing particularly special about Marion. She clarified that she had no interest in him as a person or a lover. It was solely about the physical aspect. She referred to it as God's gift, prompting laughter from both her and Shelley. I listened to the two of them and felt the anger coursing in my veins. I sat through the rest of the tape, but there wasn't much more. Once he'd had lovemaking with her a second time, he gave up all attempts to resist. She'd been with him 2 to 3 times a week for nearly a month, and there was no sign she was ready to stop. In fact, she said that she'd been enjoying lovemaking with me more lately as well, perhaps because her secret was kind of a turn-on. It was clear that her BTF had overcome whatever guilt she might be feeling about betraying me. Me, the love of her life, her husband of 7 years, the man who was completely devoted to her, and who still remembered what forsaking all others was supposed to mean. It took a while to think through my plans, and it was 02:30 a.m. By the time I went to sleep in the guest room, I was done seeing and sleeping next to her, or even talking to her. I slipped into the bedroom and got clothes for the next day without waking her. At 06:30 a.m., I was up and out the door. I left a brief and cold note, trying not to reveal anything, stating that Anne had an early meeting due to my call. Apologizing for forgetting to mention it, I made 2 copies of the tape last night at the office. By 8:30, I was on the phone with my best friend from college, who worked at a downtown law firm. I requested a favor, asking him to arrange an hour with the meanest and most bloodthirsty divorce lawyer in his firm. There was a moment of silence, and he expressed shock, apologizing for the situation. After a brief conversation, Eddie showed me into the office of Margaret Adamson, a lead partner in his firm, known for her intimidating presence. Eddie had described her as someone even sharks would avoid in the ocean. Margaret's look and handshake confirmed that she meant business, and I was already relieved that she would be representing me rather than Anne. I played Margaret and Eddie part of the tape. After hearing the initial moments, Margaret instructed her assistant to hold her calls, and we listened to the rest. When it concluded, we sat in silence for a minute. Margaret then straightforwardly asked, "Okay, what do you want?" Expressing my desire for a divorce due to infidelity, I emphasized avoiding the cliché of irreconcilable differences. I mentioned being reasonable about our savings, but insisted on keeping the house. Additionally, I wanted Anne to revert to her maiden name, as I believed she no longer deserved to be Mrs. Will Harris. Margaret nodded, studying me intently, and then requested a brief break with Eddie to discuss the legal details. Within 5 minutes, I was back in Margaret's office, and she was ready to proceed. She assured me that the divorce would likely proceed smoothly with Anne accepting the terms. However, she mentioned that the tape would be inadmissible since Anne was unaware of its recording. I grimaced and disclosed the complication involving my sister-in-law Shelley's infidelity, her offer to help, and the content of the first part of the tape. I explained my intention to inform my brother, acknowledging that he would be devastated. Half ironically, I suggested Margaret consider handling my brother's divorce as well. She looked at Eddie and then back at me. We started by listening to Shelley's part of the tape, and after another huddle between Margaret and Eddie, she remarked, "Quite a pair of wives you two picked." Seeing my reaction, she apologized, acknowledging it was inappropriate. Margaret then outlined the situation, stating that the tape might not be admissible against Anne due to her unawareness, but Shelley could be subpoenaed to testify about what Anne told her. It shouldn't make much difference. Once Anne's attorney hears the tape, he won't be in much position to fight. In your brother Dave's case, the tape is admissible because Shelley knew she was being recorded, so she's got no defense whatsoever. That divorce will be easy as long as he's not totally unreasonable. Then there's the health club. We can sue both them and Marion. Marion won't have much money, presumably, but Eddie and I can pretty much guarantee you a nice big check from the club somewhere in the high 6 figures to $1.5 million. The tape could be used in a civil lawsuit, and there's no way in hell they would ever let this get into the newspapers. Think of all the husbands who'd be canceling their wives' club memberships. She laughed briefly, maintaining a somewhat intimidating demeanor. Margaret assured that she would initiate the divorce documents, and Eddie escorted me out of the office. He expressed his apologies, assuring me that Margaret would fulfill my requests. Despite feeling terrible about the situation, I tried to smile and reassured him, saying, "It's okay, Eddie. This just means you and I will have more time to play tennis together." I expressed my gratitude, thanked him, and left. The rest of the day I submerged myself in details. I arranged a locksmith to meet me at the house at 4:30. I made a dinner date with Dave so I wouldn't be around when Anne came home. I cut off her credit cards and arranged separate accounts for our money. And I wrote her a note. It took several tries. Not easy to say goodbye to the love of your life, even under these circumstances. When I finally finished it, I put it in an envelope, wrote Anne's name on the front, and took it home. The locksmith finished by about 5:15. I had a beer, sitting by myself quietly in the kitchen. Then I taped the note to the outside of the front door, locked it, and left. I knew Anne would be home between 6 and 6:30. I idly wondered what she'd do first. Try the door and find her key. Didn't work or read the note. Our marriage is over. Now you'll be free to play around all you want with Marion and his big tool. I've had the locks changed. If you want to get your clothing and personal things, call my attorney. I left Margaret's name and number. She'll arrange for you to have supervised access to the house. When I'm not here, I won't be talking to you again. You broke my heart. I loved you as much as any man can love a woman, and I looked forward to our growing old together. Too bad our marriage vows didn't mean as much to you as some lovemaking with a big tool, or as much as they did to me. When Dave joined me for dinner, he immediately sensed that something was amiss. After placing our orders, I took a deep breath and disclosed that Anne had been cheating on me, and I was planning to divorce her. His reaction was evident, staring at me with an open mouth, a sight I hadn't witnessed before. He expressed shock, exclaiming, "Oh my God, Will! My God, Anne! Are you sure?" Realizing the obvious, he apologized, acknowledging it as a foolish question. He could see the truth in my expression and asked if I wanted to talk about it. I did, sharing my hurt and despair with my best friend over dinner. The beers provided some comfort, but having Dave's unwavering support meant even more. Towards the end of the meal, I revealed another aspect, mentioning that there's one part of it I haven't told him. Shelley is the one who got me proof. She taped a conversation of her and Anne talking, and Anne told her the whole sorry business. Dave looked at me sympathetically, expressing his sorrow. He added that he hoped it wouldn't make me angry, but he felt lucky to have a fantastic wife like Shelley. He mentioned that he's not surprised she helped me, as she has always liked me. He acknowledged that I haven't always approved of her, but began praising her. I couldn't bear to hear more praise for Shelley, especially considering the circumstances. I interrupted him, saying, "Listen, Dave, wait. Don't say anything else. Let me pay the bill, and I need you to come back to the house with me." A note with Will written on it in a flowery handwriting was found under the screen door. Without reading it, I dropped the note on the hall table and ushered him into the guest room. I communicated the seriousness of the situation to Dave, expressing my love for him and emphasizing our friendship. He responded with a wary look, not accustomed to such conversations. I urged him to listen to a tape recorded by Shelley, instructing him to stay seated while I went to another room. Rewinding the tape to the beginning, I pushed the tape recorder toward him and left. In the subsequent moments, I heard quiet murmurs from the tape, followed by a crash. Dave, seemingly agitated, paced around while the tape continued to play until it fell into silence. Upon entering the kitchen, Dave confronted me with intense anger, accusing me of relishing in the knowledge about Shelley and deliberately keeping it from him. He berated me for allowing him to praise her without revealing the truth. He insisted that I must be enjoying the situation, accusing me of harboring a long-standing dislike for Shelley. In response, I stood up and raised my voice, questioning what I had just discovered about him. My glare intensified, and gradually Dave's demeanor softened. His shoulders slumped, fists unclenched, and he sat down at the table, resembling an old man. After a moment, he apologized, saying, "Sorry, Will. I know you're hurting just like I am. It's just you obviously knew about this." "Why didn't you tell me, Dave?" I said as gently as I could. "You know how you were about Shelley. You would never have believed me. Remember that fight we had when I criticized something she'd said to Mom? I found out about Shelley a week ago, and I knew that I couldn't possibly tell you. You had to hear it for yourself. I only got the tape from her yesterday. The two of us emptied a few beer bottles while I told Dave the whole story. I began with seeing Shelley and Robbie at the restaurant. Then the deal she offered me the making of the tape and my conversation with Margaret Adamson. She's handling my divorce, and she'll be happy to represent you too if you want. Our cases are pretty much a shoo-in, she says. We talked late into the night, and then Dave crashed in my guest room. He didn't have the heart to face Shelley. The phone rang several times, but we didn't answer it. And finally, I just left it off the hook. A few days went by, and then a few weeks, and kept calling for a while, leaving me messages of her crying and begging to talk to me. But I didn't answer or call her back. I just didn't see any reason to talk to her. She tried finding me at work, but I'd asked our receptionist to tip me off, and I ducked out of my office each time she showed up. A couple of times I saw her car parked in front of the house when I came home from work, so I just drove right by and stayed away for a couple of hours until she left. Margaret Adamson did her work beautifully. The divorce papers were served. She fought through all the legal maneuvers that Inn's lawyer tried to pull, and a court date was set. In his initial conversations with Margaret, he claimed that no infidelity had taken place. Once she sent him a copy of the tape, we stopped hearing that line. Instead, he pointed out that the tape was inadmissible. Margaret didn't even dignify that one with a response. She just sat tight. And as the court date approached, Anne's lawyer finally called Margaret to ask for a settlement conference. The day after listening to the tape, Dave moved out of his apartment with Shelley and into my guest room. He drove over and watched the place until she went out, then called me. The two of us packed up everything he wanted and got out of there in less than 2 hours. He told me, "I don't want to see her. I don't want to hear a word she has to say. I just want to get the hell away from her." His eyes started to tear up, and I turned away. Was it a good thing or a bad thing that I knew just how he felt? Shelley left me a couple of angry, cursing messages at home, a nice counterpoint to Anne's remorseful ones. After a day or two, I started screening the messages, deleting any from Shelley and as soon as I heard their voices, Shelley called Dave at work and sent him letters. But he never responded to them. Margaret was handling his divorce too, and he and I just sat back and let her run the show. To my amazement, the lawsuits against Marion and the health club were resolved first. The one against Marion never went anywhere. He disappeared one day and left no forwarding address. But the health club, eager to avoid negative publicity, just as Margaret had predicted, reached a $1.1 million settlement. I signed a pledge of confidentiality and walked away with the largest check I'd ever seen in less than 10 weeks. My brother was a rock, and I guess I was for him too. We lived like two bachelors, going out to eat a lot, taking in a ball game from time to time, or just sitting around and talking over a few beers. We talked about, and then Shelley, about our lives with them, about how many great women there were out there just waiting for us. It wasn't easy to believe that last bit, and yet we were really able to help each other. I could see as plain as day that there wasn't a thing wrong with Dave that led to Shelley's behavior. She was simply a selfish strumpet. Likewise, Dave reassured me that Inch cheating wasn't a reflection on me, just an indication of how screwed up SG was. Neither of us probably believed the other one all that much, but it still helped to hear it. Dave was divorced first, as it turned out. He made it clear that he wouldn't talk to Shelley under any circumstances. And so Margaret handled the whole thing. She told him that Shelley had fought for more money at first, but that with the tape, she didn't have a leg to stand on. I went into the office with him the day he had to sign the papers. Shelley had already signed them. He smiled grimly, shook Margaret's hand, and thanked her, and then went off to the men's room. I heard him crying through the door. When I went to find him 3 weeks later, it was my turn. We met on a Tuesday, and in me and the two lawyers, and in her lawyer had agreed to a settlement, but insisted on two conditions: that I drop infidelity as a reason for the divorce, and that I meet privately with, and before we signed the papers, I told Margaret I was willing to see, but not willing to drop infidelity. Eventually, we agreed that I'd give Anne a chance to persuade me. If she could do so, we'd change it to irreconcilable differences, that old standby. In a weird way, I was looking forward to hearing what Anne had to say. Maybe I'm a masochist, but I loved her for 10 years, and I couldn't really imagine simply walking away without one final conversation. When I got there and was sitting in the conference room wearing a blue dress she knew I'd always loved. Her hair was shorter, and it looked great. She was pale, but she was the same beautiful woman I had loved for so long. "Okay, it's your meeting," I said neutrally. My heart was pounding, but I tried to look calm. "Just 2 things. All right? Please don't tell me how much you love me, and don't tell me it was just love-making." She flushed, and I could see tears welling up in her eyes. "Will, I'm so sorry, but how can I not say those things? I screwed up, plain and simple. I was selfish and thoughtless, and I hurt you. But it was just love-making, nothing but a stupid, stupid impulse. I gave in to you. Can't imagine how much I've gone over it, how many times I wished I had never done it. Yes, well, but you did do it, didn't you? I had no intention of making this easy for her. Just being in the same room with her, knowing that we were about to separate for good, and why broke my heart all over again. I went to the window and gazed out, unwilling to let her see my stricken face. Behind me, I could hear her crying softly. Baby, it was. It didn't mean anything, you know. It was the dumbest, most hurtful thing I could ever have done to you. I know that, but it meant nothing to me. It has nothing to do with how much I love you. I let her talk a bit more, listening to the pleading tone, the sweet voice I had always loved, but not hearing a single word that I couldn't have predicted. She had nothing to say to me that I didn't already know, and nothing that made a damn bit of difference. After a while, I turned around and came back to the table, sitting down directly across from her. And just so you know, I still love you very much. But it's over between us. She started to cry again. You took from me, from us, the most precious thing we had together, aside from our love, the bond of trust between us. How could I ever make love to you again? wondering if it was me you were thinking about or Marion and his freak show tool. How would I know whether you were loving me or missing him? And how could I live with you, wondering where you were every time you were 10 minutes late coming home, wondering what you were doing on your lunch hour, wondering whether you'd found another big tool to play around with? I waited, but she had no reply to make. Finally, between the sobs, she said, "Please, baby, please. Couldn't you give me one more chance? And I'll give you a few minutes to think about this one. What if I had met some bimbo with fantastic big jugs and started bawling her on the side for a few weeks? Nobody I liked or respected. Just a handsome girl who was a fantastic lay, who gave me a degree of pure physical pleasure that I never got from you. And then you found out about it. Could you stay with me? Could you get past the feelings of hurt? The sense of total betrayal? Could you overcome the doubts you'd have about your own attractiveness? The fears that you weren't ever going to be the one I really wanted?" She looked up at me with the saddest eyes I had ever seen. "Well, I don't have to think about it. I've thought about it for weeks now. Could I forgive you? Could I take you back if it were the other way around? And the answer is no, I couldn't. I just couldn't handle those feelings. I know that. So I'm asking you to do something I couldn't do, to be a braver, stronger person than I could ever be, and to give me a chance to make it up to you a lifetime, to show you how sorry I am and how much I love you." There was silence a minute, 2 minutes, as we looked at one another, both of us thinking about all we had meant to one another and how we had arrived. At this point, I stood up slowly, hating myself and hating her for cheating on me, and now for throwing it all back on me. I don't know whether I can't do it or won't do it, but I'm not that braver, stronger person you want me to be. Goodbye. And I waited by the open door for a moment, looking back, giving her a chance for the last word. She had her head down, crying. She didn't say anything else. Margaret was waiting for me down the hall, a surprisingly sympathetic look on her hard face. "Let her have irreconcilable differences," I growled. "It doesn't make a damn bit of difference to me." Dave and I sat at my kitchen table. We'd had a few, but we weren't drunk. "Listen," I said, "I've made some plans." He nodded, and I went on. "After the lawyer's fees, I still have nearly $800,000 from that settlement. I've invested all but $50,000 of it in some nice, safe places, so there will be a lovely nest egg for when we're old and feeble. But the last 50 grand has been designated to Will and Dave Harris Recovery Fund, and we're going to start spending some of it. I've rented us 4 weeks at a 2-bedroom condo in Cancun, starting 2 weeks from now. Go tell your office you're taking some time off. We are going to be a pair of fun-loving bachelors, 2 gay divorces, if you know what I mean." He just raised an eyebrow, and I laughed. "No a-hole. Gay, as in cheerful. We've done enough moping around telling each other how badly we've been screwed over. Cancun was a blast, or at least as much of one as it can be for 2 guys recovering from broken hearts. We got a lot of sun, played a lot of tennis, swam a lot, and drank a lot, though we kept one another from going off the deep end with each passing day. We got tanner, a little fitter, and slightly further from the nightmare we just lived through. And let me say, God bless my charismatic and charming brother. Despite the blow to his self-confidence that Shelley had laid on him, he got his old groove back, and we had a lot of female companionship. His favorite stunt, and damned if it didn't succeed 75% of the time, was to spot 2 attractive women sitting together. He'd drag me straight over to their table, smile winningly, and say, "Pardon me, ladies. I'm sure you wouldn't be comfortable letting a stranger buy you a drink, so let me introduce my brother, Will Harris." Then it was up to me, the shyer one, to say, "Delighted to meet you both. This is my brother, Dave Harris." Then he would step back in. "Phew, glad that's taken care of. Now, may we buy you a drink?" By this time, the women were usually at least grinning, if not laughing, and we'd mostly find ourselves with female companionship for the evening. Sometimes the companionship lasted until breakfast. After all, unattached women in Cancun were as eager for fun as we were. I had maybe 6 different women in my bed over those 4 weeks, and I imagined Dave's number was a little higher. Mostly it was fun, just laughter and pleasure, and keeping it light. The first couple of times I made love to a woman, I was tentative, distracted by thoughts of Marion and his huge tool, even though both he and were thousands of miles away. It was hard to compete with what I knew he had done to her. But the women didn't seem to notice. and being with someone new got easier each time. One-night stands may not be for everyone or for every stage in a person's life, but they seemed to be what Dave and I needed. Only one of the women was different, Shannon, a tall Irish redhead a year younger than I was. We did all the same things, had some drinks, laughed a lot, went for dinner, did some dancing, and back to my place to bed. She was handsome and responsive, as eager to be with me as I was to be with her. We had a lot of fun. When it got different was later, around 3 a.m. For some reason, I woke up and just lay in bed, Shannon softly breathing in sleep beside me. Thoughts of and filled my head and all that we had had together and how it had been taken from me. I started crying very quietly, and before I knew it, Shannon was kneeling beside me, holding me in her arms, saying, "Let it out, baby, it's okay." I was embarrassed, but I couldn't stop. She kept soothing me, and finally, in response to her urgings, I told her the whole story. By the time I was done, the sun was rising. We shuffled into the kitchen, and I made breakfast for us while she told me her own story. Also a divorce, no cheating, just a husband who grew ever more distant, ever more driven and career-oriented, until there was just no marriage left. She'd been on her own for nearly 2 years. After eating, we found our way back to the bedroom without a word spoken and made love. The night before had been screwing, fun, exciting, friendly, but just lovemaking. This time, we looked into each other's eyes, murmured tenderly, and found a very different level of closeness. My one-night stand with Shannon turned into 4 wonderful nights. In the afternoon, she left. My brother Dave was a little worried about me, I think. Urging me to meet new ladies, he mentioned it was time to move on. I acknowledged that one was special. He agreed, saying he liked her too. However, he reminded me that she had gone home, and we still had 10 more days to spend down here. He dragged me off to the tennis court, then the pool, and by that evening, we were chatting with 2 secretaries from San Francisco on their very first trip outside the United States. That night, they slept in their own hotel room, but the next afternoon, Barbara joined me in my room for her first ever experience on foreign soil. Dave and I went out for dinner at a steak place we both liked. It had been 8 months since Cancun. Dave had long since found a terrific apartment he liked, but we still spent a lot of time together. Just after we ordered, Dave leaned forward and mentioned quietly that across the room, 2 couples had just sat down, and one of them was her, with some guy. I appreciated the warning, and despite my sudden thumping heart, I waited a few seconds before casually turning around to look across the dance floor. She had already spotted us and was looking steadily over at me. I gave her a friendly, non-committal smile and a wave, and she smiled back. Then, I forced myself to turn around and chat some more with my brother. He inquired if this was the first time I had seen her since the divorce, and I nodded. I admitted that I didn't think I'd have this much of a reaction, but the surprise had something to do with it. I suggested to Dave that he do me a favor. Let's enjoy our dinner and not tell me anything about what she's doing over there, how she looks. I didn't want to know. Dave agreed, saying that it's fine, and then he launched into a funny story about a coworker who had been flirting with him for a couple of weeks. While he wasn't terribly interested in her, he was enjoying the game. While enjoying our coffees and casually observing the dancing couples, I felt a hand on my shoulder and heard that familiar voice inquiring about my well-being. Rising from my seat, I gazed into Anne's eyes and offered a greeting, once again caught off guard. She suggested a dance for old time's sake, and I agreed willingly. As we danced, memories flooded back. Her warmth in my arms, her beauty, and the nostalgia for happier times. Amidst discussing mundane topics like our jobs and the weather, we eventually lapsed into silence. Lost in the emotions of holding her again, I reflected on the dances we shared and the realization that those moments were now memories. Towards the end of the dance, Anne pulled back to look into my eyes and inquired about my well-being. Despite not owing her any honesty, I decided to share my feelings. I expressed that I was all right, pretty good, I guessed. Some days were better than others. Seeing her that night, dancing together, was powerful, and I didn't know I would feel this much. Anne, with a serious expression, confessed that she wasn't so all right. She missed me every day, and being in my arms again had a profound effect on her. Unsure of how to respond, I remained silent as the music played its last chords. Anne hesitated to let me go and shared a thought. had I ever wondered if I made the right decision. She admitted that she still thought about us all the time, but usually didn't get much past wondering why I made the wrong decision. Later, when I dropped Dave off, he expressed concern about my well-being. I reassured him, acknowledging the inevitability of such encounters in a small town. Confirming our tennis plans for the next day, I headed home. In the dim bedroom, as I undressed quietly, she rolled over towards me and inquired about my evening with Dave. I shared the strangeness of the encounter, contemplating that it might have been for the best that she hadn't joined. She responded with a loving smile, proposing that I hold her for a few minutes. Embracing, I felt her tender kisses along the side of my neck, savoring her familiar scent.